Welcome. You're about to listen to a collection of true crime stories selected for their genuinely disturbing nature. This isn't your typical true crime experience. We've paired these unsettling narratives with the continuous, calming sound of rain and presented them against a black screen. The intention is to create an environment conducive to listening without visual distraction, perhaps as you wind down, try to sleep, or simply want an atmospheric background. Be aware that the stories you'll hear are based on real events and may be upsetting due to their content. So, adjust your volume, get comfortable, and let the combination of soothing rain and unsettling reality begin. My name is Dave Miller. Just a few weeks ago, if you'd asked me, I would have said I was living the dream. Or at least, finally stepping onto the path toward it. We just bought our dream house out here in suburban Ohio, Westfield, technically, though it felt miles away from any city bustle. It was everything Maria and I had talked about for years, a sprawling colonial with character, perched on a generous lot with ancient oak trees, a big yard perfect for the kids, Ellie and Sam, to run wild in. Even had the cliché white picket fence, freshly painted. The whole 9 yards, just like the brochures promised. It took every single penny we had, scraped together from savings, a small inheritance Maria received, and cashing in some bonds we'd earmarked for retirement. Every last cent. But standing there on closing day, keys heavy in my hand, watching Ellie chase Sam across the overgrown lawn, Maria's tired but beaming smile reflecting in the pristine window panes, we figured it was worth it. More than worth it. It was a fresh start, a clean slate desperately needed after that whole mess back east. I still don't like thinking about it, the whispers, the sideways glances, the feeling of being judged wherever we went. It wasn't anything criminal, not really, just a spectacular flame out of a business venture mixed with some bad blood and misunderstandings that seemed to follow us like a stray dog. Ohio felt like liberation. A place where nobody knew the name Miller, or we could just be a normal family. We'd only been here a week, maybe 10 days. Life was a chaotic symphony of cardboard boxes, misplaced tools, and the echoing laughter of the kids exploring their new domain. We were still figuring out which light switch controlled what, where the nearest decent pizza place was, the usual settling in dance. The house itself felt solid. Old, certainly, built sometime in the early 20s, the realtor had said, but with good bones. It had quirks, sure. Floorboards that groaned underfoot like an old man settling into a chair, a faint, musty smell in the basement we were airing out, drafts that sneaked through hallways even with the windows shut. But it felt like our quirks now, part of the charm we bought into. Maria was already planning garden layouts, Ellie had claimed the attic room with the slanted ceilings as her castle, and Sam was obsessed with the ancient-looking dumbwaiter we found sealed up in the pantry wall. Normalcy was slowly asserting itself over the chaos of the move. Then I found the first letter. It was tucked amongst the junk mail and a welcome to the neighborhood flyer from a local church. Plain white envelope, standard size. No return address. My own address, 657 Boulevard, was typed, slightly crooked, across the front. But it wasn't addressed to me, not by name. Just the new owner. Odd, I thought. Maybe a neighborly welcome, albeit an anonymous one. I slid it open with my car key right there at the end of the long driveway, the late afternoon sun warming my back. Inside was a single sheet of cheap, thin paper, folded neatly in thirds. The text was typed, Stark black letters from what looked like an old manual typewriter. Some characters slightly raised, others fainter. The E consistently punched a little harder than the rest. "Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard," it began. "Okay, friendly enough, I suppose. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood." Standard pleasantries. Then, the shift. It wasn't abrupt, more like a slow, creeping change in temperature. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades now, it continued. And as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming. My grandfather watched the owls in the 1920s and my father watched in the 1960s. It is now my time. My blood ran a little cold. Watching. What the hell did that mean? It sounded possessive, proprietary. Like the owls wasn't really mine. I read on, the friendly tone now feeling like a thin veneer over something unsettling. Do you know the history of the owls? Do you know what lies within the walls of 657 Boulevard? Why are you here? I will find out. It ended abruptly, no signature, no closing. Just those questions hanging in the air. I stood there for a long moment, the envelope dangling from my fingers. The cheerful sounds of Ellie and Sam playing tag on the lawn suddenly seemed distant, fragile. Watching. For decades. Grandfather, father, now, them. Who? I crumpled the letter instinctively, shoving it into my pocket. My first thought was a prank. Some local crank, maybe bored teenagers, trying to spook the new family on the block. It had to be. People did weird things. But the specificity. Within the walls, it tapped into that primal fear of the unknown lurking just beneath the surface of the ordinary. I glanced back at the house. The windows looked like dark, vacant eyes staring back at me. Suddenly, the peeling paint on one of the shutters seemed less like charming imperfection and more like a festering wound. I decided not to mention it to Maria just yet. Why worry her? It was probably nothing. A stupid, tasteless joke. I forced a smile as I walked back towards the house, calling out that dinner would be ready soon, trying to inject a cheerfulness into my voice that I no longer felt. That night, though, lying in bed, the house's normal creaks and groans sounded different. Less like settling wood, more like furtive footsteps, whispers just beyond the range of hearing. Do you know what lies within the walls? The question echoed in the darkness. The crumpled first letter stayed in my pocket for a day before I smoothed it out and hid it away in my desk drawer, underneath a stack of old tax returns. Out of sight, maybe out of mind. For a few days, it almost worked. Life's relentless pace, unpacking the seemingly infinite remaining boxes, setting up utilities, figuring out the baffling recycling schedule, pushed the anonymous welcome to the nightmare note to the back burner. I tried to rationalize it. Westfield seemed like a quiet town, maybe too quiet. Perhaps generating a bit of low-level mischief was how someone got their kicks. A lonely eccentric, a bored teenager with access to a vintage typewriter. I even did a cursory online search for the owl's history, plugging 657 Boulevard, Westfield, Ohio history into Google. It yielded nothing more dramatic than old property listings and census records mentioning previous occupants with unremarkable names. No dark secrets, no unsolved mysteries jumped out. See? Nothing, I told myself. just a crank. But the unease lingered, a low hum beneath the surface of daily life. I found myself pausing by the window, watching neighbors retrieve their mail or walk their dogs, scrutinizing their faces for any flicker of malice, any sign that they were the author. Was it Mr. Henderson from across the street, who always seemed to be trimming his already immaculate hedges? Or the quiet woman 2 doors down who rarely made eye contact? Every passing car felt like an observation post. I started noticing just how many windows faced our property, from the houses opposite, the ones flanking us, even glimpses from houses further down the block through gaps in the trees. We were exposed, sitting ducks in our dream house. I mentioned the letter to Maria one evening, trying to sound casual, framing it as a weird but ultimately harmless prank. She frowned, read the smoothed-out paper, and her reaction mirrored my initial chill. "That's creepy, Dave," she'd said, folding it carefully. "Decades? Watching. Who talks like that?" But, like me, she initially leaned towards the prank explanation, albeit a particularly unsettling one. We agreed not to dwell on it, not to let it spoil our fresh start. Then, exactly 2 weeks after the first, the second letter arrived. Same cheap envelope, same typed, slightly uneven address, the new owner, 657 Boulevard. My stomach plummeted when I saw it in the mailbox, nestled innocently between a credit card offer and a grocery store flyer. It felt calculated, deliberate. Not random. I waited until the kids were engrossed in a cartoon upstairs before opening it, my hands trembling slightly. The friendly pretense of the first letter was gone. This one dove straight into the unnerving. It started by referencing our move, then twisted it horribly. 657 Boulevard is anxious for you to move in, it read. It has been years and years since the young blood ruled the hallways of the house. Have you found all of the secrets it holds yet? Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? My breath hitched. Young blood. Ellie and Sam. He was talking about my children. A primal wave of fury washed over me, quickly followed by icy fear. This wasn't a prank anymore. This felt targeted, predatory. It got worse. I am pleased to know your names now and the names of the young blood you have brought to me. How? How could they know our names? We hadn't put up a personalized mailbox yet. We were still using the generic occupant labels on some things. Had they overheard us in the yard? Been closer than I thought? The letter continued with chilling specificity. You have children. I have seen them. So far, I think there are 3. We only have 2, Ellie, who's 8, and Sam, who's 6. Was the writer mistaken, or were they trying to imply they'd seen another child? Perhaps one that wasn't ours, inside the house? The ambiguity was horrifying. Was your old house too small for the growing family? It asked mockingly. Or was it greed to bring me your children? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. I felt physically sick. Then came the detail that shattered any remaining illusion of safety, any hope this was just guesswork. I see you have started renovations. That dumpster in the driveway is convenient. We did have a dumpster, rented for the debris from tearing out some old, water-damaged drywall in the laundry room and the remnants of the dilapidated shed out back. It was a bright yellow eyesore sitting right there for anyone to see. But then, and the choice of wood for the deck, Brazilian walnut, I believe. An interesting choice. Maria and I had spent an entire evening discussing deck materials, spreading samples across the kitchen table, weighing the cost versus durability of Brazilian walnut versus composite. We'd settled on the just 2 days prior. That conversation happened inside the house, with the curtains drawn. How could anyone know that? Were there listening devices? Had someone been peering through a gap in the curtains with binoculars? Or, the most terrifying thought, had someone been inside? The letter ended with a chilling flourish of omnipresence. 657 Boulevard is a busy street. Cars pass by constantly. Who am I? Maybe I am the garbage man. Maybe I am the delivery driver bringing your mail. Look at all the windows you can see from 657 Boulevard looking back at you. Maybe I am in one. That's when the real paranoia took root, sinking its claws deep into our lives. I showed the letter to Maria, and the color drained from her face. Her earlier attempt at nonchalance evaporated instantly, replaced by sheer terror. Young blood? He knows about the deckwood? Dave, this isn't a joke. Her voice trembled. That night, neither of us slept much. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intruder. Every shadow in the hallway seemed to lengthen and shift. The next morning, Maria refused to let the kids play in the yard, even the fenced-in back part. Allie and Sam, sensing the tension, became subdued, their usual boisterous energy replaced with wide-eyed questions we couldn't answer. We immediately invested in new locks, heavy-duty deadbolts for every exterior door. I installed motion sensor floodlights around the perimeter. We ordered a basic security camera system online, though the wait for installation felt agonizingly long. But these measures felt like flimsy paper shields against a ghost. How do you protect yourself from someone who knows what you discuss in your own kitchen? Someone who watches from unseen vantage points, who could be anyone, anywhere. Every car that slowed down on the boulevard became a potential threat. Every jogger, every dog walker, every neighbor waving from their porch felt suspect. The friendly waves we'd received in that first week now seemed menacing, potentially masking the watcher. Our dream house, our sanctuary, had transformed into a fishbowl, and we were the terrified specimens trapped inside, watched by an unseen collector. The fresh start felt like a cruel mirage, replaced by a suffocating, ever-present dread. We were isolated, vulnerable, and utterly terrified, knowing that the watcher was out there, patient and seemingly drawing closer. The days following the second letter bled into a monotonous cycle of fear and hypervigilance. Our dream house became a fortress, but it felt more like a prison. We existed behind drawn blinds and locked doors. The security cameras I'd hastily installed offered little solace. Mostly, they showed empty stretches of lawn, swaying trees, and the occasional oblivious delivery truck rumbling past on the boulevard. Sometimes, late at night, reviewing the footage, I'd see flickers of movement at the edge of the frame, branches dancing in the wind, a stray cat darting across the driveway. Or was it? My sleep-deprived mind started playing tricks, seeing figures in shadows, convinced that the watcher was just clever enough to stay out of direct sight, observing from the periphery. Allie and Sam, confined mostly indoors, grew fractious and withdrawn. Their questions changed from "why can't we play outside" to "Mommy, is the man watching us now?" Maria and I moved through the house like ghosts, whispering, arguing in hushed tones, the constant stress fraying our nerves raw. The fresh start we desperately sought had curdled into a waking nightmare. Every floorboard creak, every rattle of the old pipes, every gust of wind against the windows sent jolts of adrenaline through me. We were living under siege, besieged by an enemy we couldn't see or understand. Then, the third letter came. Like clockwork, 2 weeks after the second. Same cheap envelope, same typed address to the new owner. This one, however, felt like a deeper violation, a more intimate intrusion. It referenced things, private things. 657 Boulevard is happy you are arguing, it stated baldly. It means you are investing passion into the house. My blood ran cold. Just the night before, Maria and I had had a terrible fight, standing right by the imposing stone fireplace in the living room. Voices low but intense, fueled by fear and helplessness. I'd wanted to call the police, demand they do something, anything. Maria, terrified of escalating things, of provoking the watcher further, had argued against it, wanting instead to just leave. Abandon the house, cut our losses, run. Our words, sharp and desperate, were meant only for each other in the supposed privacy of our own home. How could this person know? The letter didn't quote us directly, but the timing, the reference to arguing, was undeniable. Were there bugs? Had someone been crouched outside the window in the dark, listening? The letter then returned to the children, its tone becoming even more menacing. The young blood, they explore, it said. Have they found what is in the walls yet? In time they will. It then reiterated its earlier, terrifying threat regarding the basement. Will the young blood play in the basement? Or are they too afraid to go down there alone? I would be very afraid if I were them. It is far away from the rest of the house. If you were upstairs, you would never hear them scream. That one was it. The basement door, already kept locked, now had a heavy bolt added. The kids were explicitly forbidden from even going near the stairs leading down. The thought of their screams echoing unheard from the depths of the house while we were oblivious upstairs, it was paralyzing. The watcher wasn't just outside anymore. They were invoking the hidden spaces within the house itself, turning our sanctuary into a potential death trap. But there was something else about this third letter, something almost overlooked amidst the chilling content. The address line. It wasn't addressed to the new owner this time. It used a last name. Except it wasn't ours. The typed letters spelled out, Mr. and Mrs. Prattis, 657 Boulevard. Prattis? Not Miller. A typo? A mistake? It felt deliberate, somehow. Significant. Why that name? The wrongness of it gnawed at me. Later that night, unable to sleep, I found myself back at the computer. I didn't search for the owl's history this time. Instead, I typed in variations of phrases from the letters, combined with house watcher letters and family watching house. And then I found it. News articles, blog posts, forum discussions about a family named Broadus. Not Prattis, but close. A family in Westfield, New Jersey, not Ohio, who had bought their dream house and received terrifying, anonymous letters from someone calling themselves the Watcher. Letters that mentioned their children, called them young blood, letters that spoke of watching the owls for years, letters that knew intimate details. My heart hammered against my ribs. The similarities were uncanny, chilling. Was our watcher mimicking that case? Were they inspired by it? Or was it somehow connected? Had the original watcher moved? Or was this a copycat playing a sick game based on those events? The realization that this might be a pattern, a known phenomenon, didn't bring comfort. It brought a new wave of dread. This wasn't just a random act. It felt like we'd stumbled into a pre-existing horror story. That was yesterday. The knowledge sat like a lead weight in my gut all day. I hadn't told Maria about the broadest connection yet. How could I? Tonight, exhausted and numb, I made my ritualistic, fearful walk to the mailbox at the end of the drive. My fingers brushed against another envelope. Same cheap paper. Same typed font. My breath caught in my throat. But this one was different. The address was perfect. Laser sharp, aligned correctly. No mistakes. Mr. David Miller. It knew my name. Correctly spelled. The deliberate error on the previous letter, now corrected with chilling precision, felt like a calculated move. A demonstration of control. My hands were slick with sweat as I tore it open, right there under the cold glare of the newly installed motion sensor light, which had flicked on as I approached. Inside, a single sheet of paper. But it wasn't filled with the usual unnerving questions or pronouncements. There were only 5 words, typed starkly in the center of the page. 5 words that stopped my heart. I see you reading this. My name's Rick Thompson. If you're reading this, maybe it means I didn't just imagine everything. Maybe it means I got out, or at least, that this story did. But sitting here now, with the pines pressing in close and the creek whispering secrets I don't want to understand, getting up feels like a pipe dream cooked up in a saner world. I took this seasonal ranger job up in the Plumas National Forest because sanity felt like a foreign country I'd been deported from. Back home, well, let's just say things went south in a way that leaves scars you can't see but feel every damn time you look in the mirror. A messy divorce, a job that evaporated, the kind of downward spiral that makes the deep woods look like a welcome embrace rather than a lonely exile. I needed quiet, the kind that sinks into your bones and maybe, just maybe, silences the noise rattling around in your skull. The job description sounded perfect: trail maintenance, checking on the odd hiker, minimal human interaction, living in a remote ranger station miles from the nearest town. Communing with nature, they called it. Sounded like just what the doctor ordered. The ranger station is in one building, but a small cluster of old cabins huddled down by a bend in Feather River, nestled deep in a canyon where the sun struggles to break through the canopy even at midday. It's beautiful, in a brooding, ancient kind of way. The air smells perpetually of damp earth, pine needles, and wood smoke, even when there's no fire lit. My assigned dwelling is Cabin 9. It's basic, rough-hewn logs chinked with something that looks suspiciously like old concrete, a stone fireplace that draws more smoke than heat, and furniture that probably saw duty in the Roosevelt era. But it's solid enough, got a door that locks, and a roof that mostly keeps the rain out. It's mine, my little box of solitude in the vast wilderness. That's all I wanted. But then there's Cabin 12. It sits just next door, maybe 50 yards through a stand of particularly dense, dark pines. And sits is the wrong word. It lurks. Even in broad daylight, it looks wrong, like a blight on the landscape. It's been empty for years, decades maybe, boarded up tighter than a drum. The planks across the windows and door are thick, weathered gray, and look like they were nailed in place with grim determination, meant to keep something out, or maybe something in. The roof sags in the middle, shingles are missing like knocked out teeth, and the whole structure leans just slightly towards the creek, as if contemplating sliding into the water and disappearing forever. Locals, the few I've encountered on supply runs into the tiny hamlet miles down the mountain, get cagey when you mention the old ranger station cabins. They talk about the woods, the river, the weather, anything but the cabins themselves. But sometimes, after a beer or two, the whispers start. They don't look you in the eye when they talk about Cabin 12. They mention something bad. Something that happened there a long time ago, back in the 80s. Multiple murders, they say. Brutal. Never solved. The kind of story that sinks into the local bedrock and becomes a dark legend, something to frighten kids and make grown men cross themselves. I try to shrug it off. Every remote place has its ghost stories, right? Tragedies happen. Time passes. But Cabin 12, it has a presence. You feel it when you walk past, a cold spot in the air even on a warm day. A stillness that's different from the quiet of the surrounding forest. It's a dead, heavy silence that seems to absorb sound. Sometimes, fetching water from the pump or heading towards the trailheads, I'd find myself taking the long way around, avoiding the path that led too close to its rotting porch. It just feels wrong. It was maybe my second week here, just starting to settle into a routine, letting the rhythm of the forest work its supposed magic. The quiet was finally starting to feel less like emptiness and more like peace. Then came the first night I couldn't ignore Cabin 12. It was late, moon hidden behind thick clouds, the kind of pitch black that feels like velvet pressing against your eyes. I was reading by the weak light of a propane lantern when I heard it. Noises from the direction of the boarded-up cabin. At first, it was just muffled thuds, heavy and irregular, like furniture being dragged across a wooden floor, or maybe something heavy falling. Thump, drag, thump. I told myself it was an animal, a bear maybe, clumsy and strong, trying to get into the derelict structure. Makes sense, right? Then came a sharper sound, a distinct, jarring crack, like metal striking wood with force. Followed by another, and another. It wasn't rhythmic, more like frustrated, angry blows. My heart started doing a little drum solo against my ribs. That wasn't a bear. Bears rummage, they don't pound metal on wood. My hand hovered over the heavy flashlight on the table. Should I go investigate? Protocol probably said yes. Self-preservation screamed hell no. As I sat there, frozen, listening, another sound drifted through the trees. Fainter this time, almost lost in the sigh of the wind through the pines, but unmistakable. A high-pitched cry, thin and reedy, abruptly cut off. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't quite animal either. It was a sound of pure terror, choked into silence. Silence fell after that. Absolute, deafening silence. More profound than the usual forest quiet. I sat there for what felt like hours, straining my ears, every nerve ending alight. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear. I wrote it off, or tried to. A tear caught in something, its legs snapping. A bear finally breaking a board. The wind playing tricks. This place, the deep woods at night, it messes with your head, makes you hear things that aren't there. That's what I told myself as I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, the memory of that choked cry echoing in my dreams. But the unease lingered, settling over me like the morning mist in the canyon. And then things got weirder, harder to explain away. A few mornings later, I went to step outside for my morning coffee, the weak sun filtering through the trees, birds starting their calls. Tucked right under the edge of my cabin's pathetic excuse for a welcome mat was a piece of paper. Folded clumsily. Not weathered, like it had been there long, but placed deliberately. I picked it up. It was a kid's drawing, done in thick crayon lines on cheap paper. Stick figures, crude and childlike. But the scene depicted sent a jolt of ice through my veins. There was one large stick figure standing tall, arms raised. In one hand, it held something long and sharp, a knife? A spike? Hard to tell from the clumsy rendering. Below it, several smaller stick figures were lying down, flat on the ground, colored red around them. Like they were bleeding. Or already dead. The big figure seemed to be standing over them, triumphant or maybe just finished. There were no smiles, no sun in the corner, just the stark, brutal tableau. Who would draw something like this? And more importantly, who would leave it on my doorstep? My first thought was a prank, maybe some local kids trying to spook the new ranger. But there were no kids around here, not that I'd seen. And the feeling I got from the drawing wasn't mischievous, it was malevolent. Cold. I crumpled it up, then immediately smoothed it out again, tucking it away in my pocket, feeling like I was hiding evidence of a crime yet to happen. Later that day, inspecting the trees near the trail leading past Cabin 12, I noticed something else. On the thick bark of the largest pine, the one standing like a silent sentinel exactly halfway between my cabin and the boarded-up horror next door, were scratches. Not the work of a bear sharpening its claws. I've seen plenty of that. These were different. Deeper, narrower gouges, clustered together. Some looked older, faded, but others seemed unnervingly fresh, slivers of pale wood exposed beneath the dark bark. They looked like someone had been throwing something sharp, repeatedly, perhaps knives, perhaps something else, at the tree. Practicing? Or just venting some furious energy? Standing there, staring at the scarred pine, the image from the kid's drawing flashed in my mind, the big figure, the sharp object, the little figures lying down. The woods suddenly felt less like a refuge and more like a place where unseen things watched, and waited, and remembered. The quiet I came here for was long gone, replaced by a silence that screamed. I knew then I couldn't ignore Cabin 12 any longer. I had to know what really happened there. Getting reliable internet access out here is a joke. The signal comes and goes like a fickle ghost, usually choosing to vanish entirely when you need it most. But after finding that drawing and seeing those unnerving scratches on the pine, the need to know overshadowed the frustration. I spent the better part of an evening nursing weak coffee, moving my laptop around the small cabin like some tech diviner, chasing the elusive signal bars. Finally, near the window facing away from Cabin 12, maybe that was coincidence, maybe not, I got a connection stable enough to start digging. I typed in variations: Plumas National Forest Ranger Station murders, Cabin 12 Feather River killings, Ketty Resort crime 1981. It took a while, sifting through unrelated forestry reports and tourist sites, but then the name surfaced, the Ketty murders. and the blood ran cold. The dry, factual tone of the old news articles and sparse wiki entries somehow made it worse. April 11th, 1981. Right next door, in cabin 28, they must have renumbered them at some point, but the location descriptions, the layout matched cabin 12 precisely. Glenna Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old son John, and his 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate were found brutally murdered. They'd been bound with electrical tape and appliance wire. Stabbed, repeatedly. Bludgeoned, likely with a claw hammer. The scene was described as exceptionally bloody, a frenzy of violence contained within those now rotting walls. Sue's 12-year-old daughter, Tina, was missing from the scene. Her skull and some other bones wouldn't be found for 3 long years, discovered miles away near Feather Falls. Abducted and murdered, just like the others. 4 victims. Right there. 50 yards from where I was trying, and failing, to sleep. Reading the details felt like swallowing shards of glass. The clinical descriptions of the bindings, the estimated time of death, the mention of a bent steak knife found at the scene, it made the noises I heard that night take on a horrifying new context. The thuds weren't furniture, they were bodies falling. The sharp crack of metal on wood, was that a hammer? And the high-pitched cry. Tina? Or Sue? Or one of the boys? My stomach churned, and the coffee threatened to come back up. I had to step outside, gulping the cold night air, trying to push the images away, but they were seared into my brain. The sheer brutality, happening in a place I now inhabited, felt like a contamination. But the part that truly burrowed under my skin, the detail that defied all logic and reason, was the other occupants of the cabin that night. In the adjacent bedroom, unharmed, apparently undisturbed, were Sue's 2 younger sons, Rick and Greg, aged 10 and 5, and their friend, Justin, who was staying the night. 3 young children. They were found the next morning, physically untouched. How? How did 3 kids sleep through a massacre happening in the next room? Through the screams, the struggle, the sheer noise that such violence must have entailed? The reports mention no signs of forced entry. The killers didn't break down the door. They were either let in, or they had a key, or they simply walked in. Did they know the family? The articles mention suspects, neighbors, murky connections, theories involving drug debts and local grudges, but nothing concrete. No arrests were ever made for the murders themselves. The case remained cold, a festering wound on the community's history. The knowledge changed everything. Cabin 12 wasn't just creepy anymore, it was a place of profound horror, a sealed tomb radiating unresolved violence. My own cabin 9 felt flimsy, inadequate. Every creak of the floorboards, every scritch of a branch against the window pane, became magnified, sinister. The forest at night transformed from a place of quiet solitude into a vast, dark theater where the final, terrible act of the Sharp family's life might still be echoing, unheard by anyone but the trees and, now, maybe me. The peace I'd sought here felt like a naive illusion, shattered by the weight of what those woods had witnessed. It was a few days after my Creme Online discovery that I became fully aware of the family in cabin 14. It sits further down the path, partially hidden by a curve in the creek and a thicket of willows. I'd seen signs of occupancy, a battered pickup truck sometimes parked nearby, smoke occasionally curling from the chimney, but hadn't encountered the residents directly. Then I learned, through a brief chat with the gruff guy who delivers propane tanks once a month, that they were distant relatives of the Sharps. He muttered it like it was common knowledge, maybe even a prerequisite for staying in that particular cabin. Relatives. Living down the path from where their family members were slaughtered. The idea sent a fresh wave of unease through me. Were they drawn here by the history? Or were they just unlucky enough to be assigned that cabin? I started seeing them more clearly after that, maybe because I was looking. The parents looked weathered. Not just tired, but worn down to the bone, moving with a kind of heavy resignation. They offered curt nods if our paths crossed, but never initiated conversation, their eyes sliding away quickly. And the kids, the prompt mentioned them being quiet, but that doesn't capture it. There were two, a girl maybe slightly younger than the boy, who looked around 10. They were unnaturally still, unnervingly contained. They didn't run or shout or play like normal kids. They drifted silently around the edges of their cabin or sat on the porch steps, watching the trees, watching the creek, watching everything and nothing. Then came the encounter that solidified my dread. I was out near the scarred pine tree, clearing some fallen branches from the path, my mind inevitably drifting back to the murders, the drawing, the impossibility of it all. I had that prickly sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I straightened up slowly and scanned the woods. And there he was. The boy from cabin 14. Standing just inside the tree line, maybe 30 feet away, partially obscured by the shadows between the pines. He was staring. Not at me, but directly at cabin 12. His focus was absolute, intense, unwavering. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't blinking. He just stood there, a small, silent figure locked onto the boarded-up horror. He looked less like a 10-year-old boy and more like an old man contemplating a painful memory, or perhaps a familiar ghost. I raised a hand, a tentative wave, maybe force a little normalcy into the moment. "Hey there," I called out softly. He didn't react. Didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge my presence in any way. It was like I wasn't even there. His gaze remained fixed on cabin 12, his expression utterly blank, unreadable. It was profoundly chilling. After a long moment, maybe 30 seconds that felt like an eternity, he simply turned, smoothly and silently, and melted back into the deeper shadows of the forest. Gone without a sound. After that, the paranoia cranked up several notches. Was I just imagining things, spooked by the history and the isolation? Or was there more to it? I started hearing things more often, faint whispers that seemed to ride on the wind, skittering sounds in the walls at night that weren't mice, the distinct impression of footsteps outside my door when I knew no one should be there. Shadows in my peripheral vision seemed to dart away when I turned. Cold spots seemed to drift through my cabin, raising goosebumps despite the warmth from the hesitant fireplace. I began wedging a thick log against my door at night, alongside the flimsy lock. Sleep became a battleground, filled with fragmented nightmares, bindings made of electrical tape, the vacant stare of the boy, the crude stick figures from the drawing dancing behind my eyelids, the glint of a hammer falling in the dark. I found myself questioning my own mind, wondering if the solitude and the grim knowledge were combining to create a phantom narrative. But the feeling of being watched, the sheer rawness emanating from cabin 12, and the unnerving presence of the silent family down the path, it all felt too real, too persistent, to be mere imagination. The forest wasn't just holding onto its secrets, it felt like it was actively trying to share them, and I was trapped in the heart of its dark stage. The rains came a few days later, not a gentle spring shower, but a deluge. For 2 days, the sky opened up, turning the creeks into muddy torrents and the forest floor into a sodden sponge. When it finally stopped, the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and bruised pine needles, and the main creek bordering the cabins was running high and fast, choked with debris washed down from higher elevations. Part of my job, the less glamorous part, involved clearing hazards and ensuring the waterways weren't completely blocked. So, clad in rain gear despite the now clear sky, I headed down to the creek bed nearest to the cabin cluster, specifically the stretch flowing between my cabin 9 and the looming presence of cabin 12, passing cabin 14 nestled further along the bend. The ground sucked at my boots, and the roar of the water was a constant, low growl that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Logs, branches, unidentifiable trash tangled with rocks and mud along the banks. It was going to be a long morning. I worked my way downstream, wrestling with waterlogged branches, pulling heaps of slick, rotting leaves away from culverts. The air felt heavy, charged, the aftermath of the storm leaving an unsettling energy in its wake. I was near a particularly thick jam of debris, old tires somehow washed down, plastic sheeting, splintered wood, when something caught my eye. Just a flicker, a dull glint of metal half buried in the thick, gray mud near the water's edge, snagged against the gnarled roots of an ancient cedar that leaned out over the creek. Curiosity, or maybe just the ingrained habit of clearing anything unnatural from the landscape, made me stop. I knelt down, pushing aside slimy leaves and muck. My fingers closed around cold, hard metal. I pulled. It came free with a sucking sound, heavy and coated in mud. I rinsed it in the cold, rushing water of the creek. And I froze. It was a claw hammer. Old, definitely. The head was deeply rusted, pitted and stained dark in patches that the water didn't seem to wash away. The claw was thick, functional, brutally simple. The wooden handle, dark and smooth from years of being submerged or buried, felt unnaturally heavy in my hand. But it wasn't the age or the rust that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the feel of it. It radiated a palpable coldness, a dead chill that seeped into my glove and up my arm, completely at odds with the warming morning air. It felt wrong. Inherently, profoundly wrong. Like holding a piece of solidified darkness. And then the connection slammed into me, hitting with the force of a physical blow. The Teddy murders case files I'd read online. The weapons used, knives, and a claw hammer. A specific claw hammer. One of the prime suspects, a neighbor named Marty Smart, whose wife had supposedly been having an affair with Sue Sharp, had reported his claw hammer missing around the exact time of the murders. He claimed it vanished from his property. It was never found. Never recovered. Until, maybe, now. Standing there knee-deep in mud, the roaring creek sounding suddenly distant, I stared at the object in my hand. This wasn't just any old rusted tool discarded by a careless workman decades ago. The weight, the coldness, the location, found practically between the scene of the crime and the suspect's former residence area, it all screamed one horrifying possibility. This could be it. The hammer. The instrument that had delivered some of the brutal, fatal blows that echoed through the history of this place. A wave of something utterly alien washed over me. It wasn't just fear, it was more primal, more compelling. An overwhelming, suffocating urge to just let it go. To open my hand, let the hammer slide back into the muddy water, let the current take it, bury it deeper than it had been before. To stand up, walk away, and forget. Forget I ever saw it, ever touched it. The feeling was so strong it was almost physical, like invisible hands pushing down on my arm, whispering directly into my mind, "Leave it. It's not yours to find. Let the river keep its secrets. Just walk away." The compulsion was terrifying in its intensity. It felt like the woods themselves, the spirit of the place, that lingering violence, was actively trying to conceal its own evidence, using me as its unwilling instrument. My arm trembled, caught between the rational knowledge that this could be crucial evidence, a key to unlocking a decades-old nightmare, and this powerful, irrational desire to obey the unseen command, to maintain the status quo of silence and ignorance. I almost did it. My fingers actually loosened for a split second. The image of the hammer tumbling back into the dark water, disappearing forever, flashed in my mind, bringing a perverse sense of relief. What stopped me? Maybe it was the sudden, sharp cry of a hawk circling overhead, its wild sound cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. Maybe it was a flash of the crude stick figures from the drawing, the small ones lying helpless. Or maybe it was just a stubborn spark of defiance, a refusal to be manipulated by whatever haunted these woods. With a gasping breath, I clenched my fist tighter around the cold handle. No! I wouldn't throw it back. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. Carefully, deliberately, I wrapped the hammerhead in a thick piece of discarded canvas I found snagged on a branch, trying to create a barrier between my skin and that unnerving coldness. Its weight felt obscene now, heavy with implication. Stuffing the wrapped object into the large inner pocket of my jacket, I abandoned the cleanup work. I had to get back to the cabin. The walk back was the longest of my life. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow thrown by the pines, seemed menacing. The forest felt awake, aware, and deeply displeased. I had the unnerving sensation of being watched not just by unseen eyes, but by the trees themselves, by the very air. I avoided looking towards cabin 12, but I could feel its presence, a silent, brooding accusation. As I passed the area near cabin 14, I caught a flicker of movement by their porch. It was the boy. He wasn't staring at cabin 12 this time. He was staring directly at me. His expression was still blank, unreadable, but as my eyes met his, I could have sworn I saw something flicker deep within them, not hostility, not fear, but a kind of ancient, knowing sadness. Then he turned, just as silently as before, and disappeared inside. Back in the relative safety of cabin 9, I locked the door, wedged the log against it, and pulled out the wrapped hammer. Laying it on the rough wooden table, I stared at it. It looked inert, just a rusted tool. But I could still feel that unnatural coldness emanating from it, could still feel the lingering echo of that urge to discard it. I had found something that was meant to stay lost. What now? Take it to the authorities miles away? Risk them dismissing me as a spooked seasonal ranger with an overactive imagination? Or worse, risk drawing attention, dredging up things that powerful forces, human or otherwise, wanted to remain buried? I couldn't shake the feeling that possessing this hammer had made me a target, had drawn me deeper into the vortex of the Ketty tragedy. I ended up hiding it, wrapped tightly, beneath a loose floorboard under my bunk, the cold seeping even through the wood. But I know it's there. A tangible piece of the horror, pulsing silently in the darkness beneath me. I came to Plumas seeking quiet, a place to heal from my own broken past. Instead, I found echoes of a far greater, more brutal wound, one that refuses to heal, refuses to stay silent. The murders in cabin 12 remain unsolved. The quiet family in cabin 14 watch and wait. And I, Rick Thompson, seasonal ranger, am now the keeper of a cold, rusted secret that feels like it could shatter everything. The woods are no longer quiet. They whisper. They watch. And I'm afraid that finding the hammer wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of something far worse. My name's Chloe Davis. 26, armed with a half-finished screenplay I was convinced was the next big indie hit, and running on fumes and instant ramen. I packed my life into a beat-up Honda Civic and drove west, chasing the neon mirage of Los Angeles. Like countless others before me, I was trying to make it as a screenwriter, fueled by a naive optimism that the city's smog hadn't yet choked out. Finding a place to live, however, was proving to be a harsh dose of reality. Every apartment listing felt like a cruel joke, shoeboxes demanding a king's ransom. My savings were dwindling faster than my hopes. Then I found it, a listing for a room at the Stay on Main. Downtown LA, price almost suspiciously low. The pictures online were functional. Dated, sure, but clean enough. It was the history I wasn't aware of initially, the dark cloud hanging over its very foundations. Back then, it was just a name, a potential roof over my head that wouldn't require selling a kidney. Pulling up to the building was an experience. The grandeur was still there, buried under layers of crime and neglect. A faded, slightly mournful elegance clung to the ornate stonework, like a forgotten silent film star still wearing her tattered finery. The sign, Stay on Main, looked newer, brasher, slapped onto the old facade. It felt less like a rebranding and more like a flimsy disguise. The lobby confirmed this feeling. High ceilings, yes, but water-stained. Marble columns, chipped and scarred. The air hung thick with the scent of stale cigarette smoke, cheap disinfectant, and something else, something metallic and vaguely unsettling, like old pennies or dried blood. It smelled like a place where hope came to die, or at least to check in indefinitely. The receptionist, a woman with eyes that had seen too much and hair dyed an improbable shade of burgundy, barely glanced up from her crossword puzzle as I signed the lease. She slid a tarnished brass key across the counter. Room 1408. 14th floor. Elevators are down the hall to the left, she mumbled, already lost in her clues again. Sometimes they stick. Just give him a minute. An understatement, as I'd soon learn. The elevators. God, the elevators. There were two, set side by side, encased in dark, vaguely gothic metalwork. They looked like ancient confessionals or miniature Iron Maidens. Calling one involved pressing a button that felt loose in its socket. When a car finally arrived, it did so with a groan that seemed to reverberate up from the building's very bowels, followed by a shuddering clang as it settled unevenly with the floor. Stepping inside felt like entering a time capsule, albeit one heading to a rather depressing past. The interior was cramped, paneled and scratched, dark wood veneer. The air was even staler in here, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 sighs and the faint, lingering aroma of desperation and decay. The fluorescent light overhead flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made the small space feel even more claustrophobic. For the first few days, I managed to avoid any major incidents. Sure, The elevator occasionally stopped a foot above or below my floor, requiring a careful hop. Sometimes it made noises that sounded suspiciously like muffled weeping. Once, the doors opened onto a completely dark, empty floor that definitely wasn't mine, before abruptly slamming shut again. I chalked it up to the building's age, the charming quirks of vintage machinery. Old buildings groan, settle, have personality, right? I was living in a piece of LA history, I told myself, trying to romanticize the decay. It had atmosphere. That's what I craved for my writing, wasn't it? Inspiration drawn from the gritty reality, the faded glamour. But the atmosphere here felt less inspiring and more suffocating. Then came that night. It was late, maybe 2 a.m. I'd been at a dingy coffee shop, hammering out a scene, fueled by caffeine and dwindling self-belief. The streets downtown were mostly deserted, bathed in the sickly orange glow of the streetlights. The hotel lobby was empty except for the night clerk, who looked even more spectral than the day lady. I nodded, heading straight for the elevators, my footsteps echoing unnervingly on the worn linoleum. I pressed the up button. Waited. The familiar groan echoed from the shaft, and eventually, one of the metal coffins lurched into view, doors rattling open. I stepped inside, the familiar stale air hitting me. I pressed the button for my floor, 14. The button lit up briefly, then flickered out. Nothing happened. The doors remained open. Come on, I muttered, pressing 14 again, harder this time. Still nothing. The light didn't even acknowledge the press. Annoyed, thinking the panel was just being finicky, I tried again. 14, dead. Okay, maybe a different floor would register. Just to get it moving? Almost randomly, playing this sort of frustrated elevator roulette, I stabbed at other buttons. 10, it lit up. 7, lit up. 4, lit up. The panel now glowed with these 3 numbers, mocking my inability to select my own floor. The doors finally slid shut with a reluctant groan, only to immediately slide back open with a soft hiss. Just the hum of the motor and the flickering light above. I stood there, confused. Okay, weird, I whispered to the empty car. I waited. The door stayed open, gaping into the dimly lit, empty hallway. Maybe I was standing too close to the sensor. I shuffled back, pressing myself against the cool, grimy veneer of the back wall. Still, the doors refused to close. They remained wide open, an invitation to what? I peered out cautiously into the hallway. Nothing. Just the threadbare carpet, the water-stained wallpaper, the silence. It felt wrong, though. Charged. Like the air before a lightning strike. I ducked back inside, feeling a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. Why wouldn't they close? It wasn't like someone was holding the button outside. The hallway was deserted. I jabbed the door close button, the one shaped like 2 arrows pointing towards each other. I jabbed it once, twice, then hammered it repeatedly. Nothing. It was completely unresponsive. The doors remained stubbornly, unnervingly open. And then I saw it. Or thought I saw it. For the briefest fraction of a second, caught in the reflection on the tarnished, polished brass of the inner door panel. It wasn't a clear image, more of a distortion in the warped metal, aided by the flickering light. But it looked like Someone standing behind me, just inside the elevator car, near the corner. A dark shape, indistinct, but undeniably there in my peripheral vision's reflection. My breath hitched. I spun around so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. Empty. Absolutely, utterly empty. Just me, the flickering light casting my own elongated, trembling shadow, and the oppressive silence of the stalled elevator car. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The air felt suddenly ice cold. Was I losing my mind? Exhaustion? Too much coffee? But the image, however fleeting, had felt so real. The sense of presence was overwhelming. Panic flared, hot and sharp. I lunged for the door close button again, mashing it with the palm of my hand, desperation overriding reason. Still nothing. The open doors felt like a gaping maw. The hallway outside no longer looked empty, but watchful. I couldn't stay in here. Not another second. Abandoning all attempts at logic or coaxing the machine, I bolted. I scrambled out of the elevator car and practically threw myself at the heavy fire door leading to the stairwell. It groaned open, and I plunged into the relative darkness of the concrete steps, the door slamming shut behind me with a boom that echoed up and down the shaft. I didn't stop running until I reached the landing for the 14th floor, my lungs burning, heart pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. I fumbled with my key, jammed it into the lock of 1408, and slammed the door shut behind me, throwing the deadbolt and leaning against the wood, gasping for air. Stupid. I felt stupidly, profoundly spooked. It was just an old elevator. Malfunctioning. And a trick of the light. Wasn't it? Back in the relative safety of room 1408, with the deadbolt thrown and the flimsy chain secured, my rationality slowly started to reassert itself, battling the primal fear that still had my hands trembling. It was just an old hotel, I told myself again, pacing the small space. Faulty wiring. Glitching sensors. Stress and exhaustion playing tricks on my eyes. Downtown LA wasn't exactly known for its state-of-the-art maintenance, especially not in buildings that offered rooms at suspiciously low rates. The stay on Main was probably riddled with electrical gremlins and mechanical ghosts born of decades of neglect. The reflection? A smudge on the brass, distorted by the flickering light and my own overtired imagination. Perfectly logical explanations. Except they didn't feel logical. Not really. The cold dread that had seized me in that elevator car lingered, a clammy residue on my skin. The sequence of events felt too specific, too weird. Why those particular buttons, 10, 7, 4, after 14 failed? Why did the doors slide open again immediately? Why did they refuse to close, regardless of sensors or buttons? And the figure in the reflection, even if it was a trick of the light, the feeling of not being alone had been intensely real. It wasn't just spooked, it was a deeper, colder feeling. A violation. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building, every distant siren, every gurgle of the ancient plumbing seemed amplified, sinister. I lay in bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the events in the elevator replaying in my mind like a stuck film reel. The flickering light, the unresponsive buttons, the gaping open doors, the fleeting reflection. I couldn't shake it. It felt less like a malfunction and more like a performance. Like the elevator itself, or something within it, was reenacting something. Driven by an unease I couldn't ignore, I reached for my laptop. If the hotel was known for being creepy or having issues, surely someone else had experienced something similar? Maybe there were forums, reviews, local news articles mentioning the notoriously unreliable elevators. I started typing, my fingers still slightly unsteady. Stay on main hotel weird elevator. Predictably, the results were mostly generic reviews complaining about the general state of disrepair, the thin walls, the questionable stains on the carpets. Nothing specific about elevators behaving quite like that. I tried broader searches. Stay on main haunted. Stay on main strange occurrences. More results popped up, hinting at a darker reputation, but still vague. People mentioned feeling uneasy, hearing strange noises, the general oppressive atmosphere. Standard old spooky building fare. Then, I noticed a recurring phrase in some of the more obscure blog posts and comment threads. Of course, it used to be the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil Hotel. The name rang a distant bell, filed away in the part of my brain reserved for half-remembered true crime documentaries and internet rabbit holes. I knew it had a reputation, but the specifics were hazy. A quick search for Cecil Hotel Los Angeles opened the floodgates. My screen filled with headlines and summaries that made my stomach clench. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, had reportedly stayed there during his killing spree. Jack Unterweger, another serial killer, had also been a guest. Suicides, mysterious deaths, unexplained disappearances. The Cecil wasn't just a hotel, it was a vortex of human misery, a magnet for the macabre. The Stay on Main rebranding suddenly felt less like a business decision and more like an attempt to exorcise the building's past by changing its name, like putting a cheap coat of paint over deep, indelible bloodstains. My unease intensified, morphing into genuine fear. I was living in that hotel. The place with the infamous reputation, the one whispered about in hushed tones. The cheap rent suddenly felt like bait. As I scrolled deeper, one name kept appearing, linked inextricably with the hotel's recent notoriety, Elisa Lam. I remember the name vaguely, the tragic story of the young Canadian tourist who went missing in 2013. But I didn't know the details. I clicked on an article titled The Unsolved Mystery of Elisa Lam at the Cecil Hotel. It recounted her disappearance, the frantic search, and the eventual gruesome discovery of her body in one of the hotel's rooftop water tanks. Guests had complained about low water pressure and a strange taste. My God, I felt sick. But it was the next part that turned my blood to ice. The article mentioned the last known sighting of Elisa, bizarre security footage taken inside one of the Cecil Hotel elevators on the day she disappeared. Footage released by the LAPD in hopes of generating leads. Footage that had gone viral due to its deeply unsettling nature. With trembling hands, I clicked the link to the video. The grainy, timestamp footage filled my screen. There it was. The same cramped elevator car, the same dark paneling, the same flickering light. And there was Elisa. Young, anxious looking. She stepped in, pressed multiple buttons. I watched, mesmerized, as her fingers danced across the panel. She pressed. 14, then 10, then 7. Then 4, 14, 10, 7, 4. My breath caught in my throat. The exact same sequence I had randomly, frustratedly pressed just hours before. The video continued. The elevator doors didn't close. Elisa peered out into the hallway, cautiously, nervously, exactly as I had done. She darted back in, pressing herself against the wall, hiding in the corner, the very corner where I thought I'd seen the reflection. She made strange, jerky movements, gesturing as if talking to someone unseen. The doors remained open. She stepped out, looked both ways, stepped back in, pressed more buttons. Finally, she walked away down the hall, and the elevator doors slid shut behind her. I stared at the screen, frozen. It wasn't just similar. It wasn't a coincidence. It was identical. The button sequence, the peering out, the hiding in the corner, the doors refusing to close despite no apparent obstruction. The elevator hadn't malfunctioned for me. It had been replaying Elisa Lam's last moments. The reflection I thought I saw, was it her? Was her final, terrifying experience somehow imprinted on this place, on that specific elevator car, repeating itself like a psychic echo? Or worse, was she still there, trapped in that loop, trying to interact, trying to, what? Warn me? Show me? The air in my room felt heavy, suffocating. The logical explanations evaporated, leaving only raw, chilling terror. The building wasn't just old, it felt actively malevolent, saturated with the tragedies it had witnessed. And that elevator, it wasn't just faulty machinery. It was a stage for a ghost. I slammed the laptop shut, pushing it away as if it were contaminated. There was no way, absolutely no way, I was ever setting foot in that elevator again. 14 flights of stairs? Fine. A marathon every time I needed to leave or return? So be it. The thought of those doors sliding open, of potentially seeing that sequence play out again, or seeing her, it was unbearable. From now on, it was the stairs. Only the stairs. The concrete, echoing, dimly lit stairs suddenly felt like the safest place in the entire godforsaken building. My vow to avoid the elevators became an ironclad rule, etched in adrenaline and the chilling memory of that video. Life at the stay on Main transformed into a grueling vertical commute. 14 flights of stairs. Up and down. Every single time. My calves burned constantly, my knees ached, and I arrived back at my room breathless and sweating, regardless of the time of day. Carrying groceries became an Olympic event. Forget popping down to the lobby for a forgotten item. Every trip out required strategic planning. But the physical exertion, the sheer exhaustion, was preferable to the icy dread that elevator inspired. The stairwell became my grim sanctuary, concrete, echoing, dimly lit by caged bulbs that cast long, distorted shadows. It smelled perpetually of dust, stale air, and faint chemical cleaner. But it felt neutral. Unwatched. Unlike that elevator car, which now felt like a baited trap, patiently waiting. Living in a state of heightened awareness, however, takes its toll. Every creak of the building, every distant city noise filtering through my thin window, seemed magnified. My imagination, already primed by the elevator incident and the hotel's gruesome history, ran wild in the quiet hours of the night. I jumped at the sound of doors closing down the hall, tensed at footsteps echoing in the stairwell, analyzed every groan of the ancient plumbing. Sleep remained elusive, often interrupted by fragmented nightmares featuring flickering lights, unresponsive buttons, and dark water. I tried to focus on my screenplay, the very reason I'd moved to this godforsaken city, but the atmosphere of the hotel seeped into everything. The words on the page felt flat, overshadowed by the real-life horror story I felt I was inadvertently living. Then, the sound started. Faintly at first. Late at night, usually between 3 and 4 a.m., when the city finally achieved a semblance of quiet. It was a watery sound. A sort of rhythmic splashing. It seemed to be coming from above. My room was on the top floor, the 14th. Above me was only the roof. The roof where they had found Elisa Lamb's body. In the water tank. The first few times I heard it, I dismissed it. Old pipes, I told myself firmly. The building's settling. Water pressure fluctuations in the ancient system. Maybe pigeons bathing in a puddle on the roof after a rare LA rain shower. There had to be a rational explanation. This hotel was practically designed to prey on suggestible minds, and mine was currently working overtime. I'd pull the pillow over my head, trying to block it out, focusing on the hum of the mini fridge or the distant wail of a siren. But the sound persisted, night after night. Sometimes it was faint, barely audible. Other times it was louder, clearer. A distinct splash, pause, splash, pause. Like someone treading water. Or struggling. The knowledge of what happened up there, directly above my head, made the sound unbearable. Rationality fought a losing battle against the creeping dread. Plumbing doesn't splash rhythmically. Pigeons don't take synchronized baths in the dead of night. The sound felt deliberate, purposeful, and terrifyingly close. Was it another echo? Another psychic imprint left behind? Or was it something else? Was the building itself remembering, groaning under the weight of its dark past? I started dreading the nighttime silence, knowing the splashing would inevitably begin, a watery torment seeping down through the ceiling. My already frayed nerves stretched tighter. I considered complaining to management, but what would I say? Excuse me, I think I hear the ghost of a former guest swimming laps in the water tank above my room. They think I was crazy. Maybe I was. One particularly draining evening, after a fruitless networking event that yielded nothing but awkward conversations and cheap wine, I trudged back to the hotel around 1 a.m. The lobby was deserted, bathed in the usual sickly fluorescent glow. I bypassed the elevators without a second glance, heading straight for the familiar, grim embrace of the stairwell door. 14 flights. My legs protested with every step, the climb seeming longer and steeper than ever. The air in the stairwell was heavy and still. Reaching the 14th floor landing, breathing heavily, I pushed open the heavy fire door. And stopped dead. The door to the roof access, usually kept firmly shut and likely locked, was slightly ajar. It was located further down the hallway, past my own room. A narrow sliver of deeper darkness was visible through the gap. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why was it open? Maintenance? A forgetful staff member? But at this hour, a cold prickle of fear traced its way down my spine. The splashing sounds echoed in my memory. I hesitated, rooted to the spot. Part of me screamed to just get into my room, lock the door, and pretend I hadn't seen it. But another part, a morbid curiosity mixed with sheer terror, compelled me forward. Tiptoeing, trying to make my footsteps silent on the worn carpet, I approached the roof access door. The hallway lights flickered overhead, casting unreliable shadows. As I got closer, I noticed something else. Something that made the air freeze in my lungs. Leading away from the slightly open roof access door, heading down the dusty hallway, directly towards the door of my room, room 1408, was a footprint. A single, bare footprint. And it was wet. Perfectly formed, glistening slightly under the flickering light, stark against the grimy, threadbare carpet. Water beaded around its edges, already beginning to soak into the fabric. It looked impossibly fresh. Like someone had just stepped out of water, taken one step, and vanished. Or worse, taken one step towards my room. I stared at it, paralyzed. The splashing sound. The roof. The water tank. Ali Salam. The open door. The wet footprint. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying certainty. It wasn't the plumbing. It wasn't pigeons. It wasn't my imagination. Something or someone had come down from the roof. From the place she died. And it was heading for my room. Panic, absolute and overwhelming, finally broke through the paralysis. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My throat was too tight. I scrambled back, fumbling frantically with my keys, my eyes darting between the wet footprint and the dark gap of the open roof access door, expecting what? To see her? To see something emerge from the darkness? My key finally found the lock. I shoved the door open, stumbled inside, slammed it shut, and through the deadbolt, the chain, anything that might offer even the illusion of security. I collapsed against the door, shaking violently, listening for footsteps outside my door, listening for the sound of splashing, listening for the inevitable turn of the doorknob. The silence outside was absolute, terrifying. But I knew, with chilling certainty, I wasn't safe. The hotel knew I was there. And whatever haunted its halls, whatever lingered by the water tanks on the roof, knew where I lived. The wet footprint wasn't just a sign. It felt like a promise. My name's Jake. Been working the dispatch desk over at the Coke County Sheriff's Office for nigh on 15 years now. Seen my sheriff nights bleed into dawn, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the low hum of the radio console. Most nights, it's quiet. Real quiet. This is rural Texas, after all. We're talking wide open spaces, fields stretching further than the eye can see under a sky choked with stars you just don't get in the city. Our brand of excitement usually runs towards speeding tickets out on State Highway 208, the occasional domestic dust-up that requires a deputy to play marriage counselor for 10 minutes, or maybe, just maybe, a call about a bewildered cow wandering onto the highway like it's looking for a late-night snack at the Starlight Motel sign. Pretty standard fare. Keeps the lights on, pays the bills. You get used to the rhythm of it, the lulls and the brief bursts of activity. You learn the regulars, the familiar voices reporting minor grievances, the tone of a real emergency versus someone just lonely or drunk. You think you've heard it all. You think nothing can really rattle you anymore. I thought that, too. Until that call came in last fall. It was late. Real late, even for a night shift. The clock on the wall showed 12:50 a.m. The air in the small dispatch room was stale, thick with the smell of old paper files and burnt coffee. Outside, the world was asleep. The wind was whistling low around the corners of the building, a lonely sound that usually just blended into the background hum. I was halfway through a crossword puzzle, trying to figure out a 7-letter word for persistent annoyance. The irony wasn't lost on me later. Then the phone shrieked. Not the steady ring of the admin line, but the sharp, urgent warble of the 911 line. I picked up on the first ring, headset already snug. Coke County 911, what's your emergency? Standard greeting, calm and measured. That's the training. Stay calm, project calm. The voice on the other end was anything but calm. Male. Youngish, maybe late 30s, but his voice was ragged, torn. He was breathing hard, huge gasping intakes of air that made the microphone pop. It sounded like he'd been running flat out, maybe for a long time. Pure, uncut panic bled through the line, raw and visceral. It set my own teeth on edge immediately. This wasn't a fender bender or a noise complaint. This was real fear. My name's Brandon, he gasped, words tumbling over each other. I ran out of gas. Highway 277. North of Bronte. Okay, standard breakdown. Happens all the time out here. Miles between gas stations, people pushing their luck. I started pulling up the map on my screen, ready to get specifics, dispatch a tow or maybe a deputy to sit with him. All right, Brandon, stay calm. Can you give me a better idea of where you are on 277? Any mile markers, landmarks? I'm in a field, he stammered, his breathing still harsh. Pulled off the road. White truck. Ford pickup. Then his voice dropped, sharpened with a new, confusing edge of desperation. Listen, I just pushed some guys over. Pushed them over? What did that mean? Like, physically pushed them? Pushed their car? My mind raced through possibilities. An altercation? A fight? Brandon, what do you mean you pushed some guys over? Are you hurt? Is anyone else hurt? The line crackled violently then, a burst of static like someone grinding rocks together right next to the phone. His next words were broken, pieces lost in the electronic noise. One car here, chasing me, woods. The connection was atrocious, fading in and out. Rural cell service can be patchy, especially out between Bronte and Tennyson, but this felt different. More aggressive. There's one car here, he repeated, slightly clearer but still frantic. A guy's chasing me through the woods. Please hurry. Please. Woods? He was in a field, now he was in the woods? And someone was chasing him? The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. This was escalating fast, twisting into something ugly. Okay, Brandon, I'm sending someone right now. Stay on the line with me. Tell me exactly what happened. Who are these guys? Why are they chasing you? More static, thick and suffocating. Then his voice, garbled, almost unintelligible. It sounded like he might have said, no talking to him, but I couldn't be sure. Could have been anything. Then, clearer, but fractured by his panic breaths, I I accidentally ran into him. Accidentally ran into them? Ran into their car? Ran into them? The contradiction hung heavy in the air. First he pushed them over, now he accidentally ran into them. Was he delirious? Injured? Lying? Before I could press him, before I could try to untangle the conflicting statements, there was a sudden, loud noise through the line. It wasn't just static this time. It was sharp. A pop, maybe? Or like a heavy branch cracking violently right beside him. Or maybe something else entirely. It was loud enough to make me flinch, pull the headset away from my ear for a split second. My heart was hammering against my ribs now. Training kicked back in. Brandon? Brandon, are you still there? What was that noise? Do you need an ambulance? My voice was steady, but my hand gripping the pen was slick with sweat. There was a pause. Silence stretched, filled only by the low, persistent hiss of the bad connection. Then, something faint. It might have been a chuckle, low and breathless. Or maybe a yeah. It was impossible to tell if it was even him, or just noise on the line, shaped into something that sounded vaguely human by a brain desperate for information. It was unsettling, deeply wrong. Then, after that moment of ambiguity, his voice came through clear as a bell. Absolutely clear. No panic, no ragged breathing. Just a flat, chillingly calm statement. "No," he said. "I need the cops." And just like that, before I could utter another syllable, before I could ask why he needed cops and not an ambulance after that noise, before I could demand clarification, the line went dead. Not disconnected, not dropped. It was just gone. Utter silence. I stared at the console, the deadline indicator glowing accusingly. The silence in the dispatch room felt heavier now, charged with the echoes of his panic and that final, unnerving statement. I immediately dispatched Deputy Miller, told him what little I knew. Male named Brandon, ran out of gas on 277 north of Bronte, white Ford pickup, possibly in a field or woods off the road. Claimed someone was chasing him after some kind of altercation involving him pushing someone or running into them. Mentioned the noise and the final request for cops, not paramedics. Miller knew the area like the back of his hand, promised to get there ASAP. The minutes ticked by like hours. I tried calling the number back. Straight to voicemail. No surprise there. I sat, listening to the radio silence, the usual comforting quiet now feeling menacing. Around 40 minutes later, Miller radioed in. He'd found the truck. White Ford F-150, right where Brandon said it would be, pulled slightly off 277, near a dense thicket of mesquite and oak trees. Doors unlocked. Gas tank, as expected, bone dry. But the keys were gone. And there was absolutely no sign of Brandon. Miller did a quick sweep with his flashlight, calling Brandon's name. Nothing. Just the wind rustling through the dry grass and the chirping of crickets. Then things got weirder. While Miller was still on scene, another vehicle pulled up. Brandon's brother. Apparently, Brandon had called him too, earlier that evening, sounding panicked, saying some guys were chasing him, possibly Mexicans, though he wasn't sure. He told his brother he was bleeding, though he didn't say how or where. The brother had been trying to reach him ever since. Then, according to the brother, and Miller confirmed this part, sounding bewildered himself over the radio, Brandon called his brother again while the brother was standing right there talking to Deputy Miller. The brother put the phone on speaker. Brandon's voice panicked again, saying, "I can see you. I'm right here." Everyone looked around. Miller swept his flashlight beam across the field, into the edge of the woods. Nothing. They called his name. Silence. He was supposedly right there, watching them, but completely invisible. Then that call ended too. That was the last anyone heard from Brandon Lawson. We searched. Deputies, volunteers, dogs, even a chopper fly over the next day. We combed the fields, the woods, the nearby Salt Creek. Found nothing. No tracks, no blood, no sign of a struggle. Nothing to explain the noise I heard, the conflicting stories, the chilling final words, or the bizarre invisible man act reported by his brother. It was like he just vanished into thin air off the side of a dark Texas highway. The case went cold faster than a blue norther blows through. Officially, it remains an active missing person case. Unofficially, it became a ghost story whispered around the county, another weird tale for the files. But for me, it was more than that. It was the call that burrowed under my skin and stayed there, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch, a question mark hanging heavy in the quiet hours of the night shift. That static, that panic, that final calm "no, I need the cops," it echoed long after the line went dead. I just didn't know how deep the echo went, or what else was hiding in the noise. Not yet. Weeks bled into months. Summer faded, giving way to the crisp bite of late fall, then the damp chill of a Texas winter. Life in Coke County went on, the rhythms of rural life reasserting themselves. Speeding tickets got issued, minor disputes flared and fizzled, cattle occasionally continued their nocturnal explorations onto county roads. Officially, the Brandon Lawson case file gathered dust, relegated to the cold case cabinet, another name added to the tragically long list of people swallowed whole by the vast, indifferent landscape. Missing person. Last seen near Highway 277. Presumed lost, or worse. The sheriff's office moved on. Everyone moved on. Everyone except me. For me, Brandon Lawson wasn't just a file number. He was a panicked voice crackling through my headset in the dead of night, a terrifying bundle of contradictions and fear. His call became a ghost that haunted the quiet hours of my shift. I'd sit there, the console lights casting long shadows in the otherwise dark room, and I hear it again in my memory, the ragged breathing, the jumbled claims of pushing someone over, then accidentally running into them. The sharp, ambiguous pop. And that final, chillingly calm request for the cops, just before the silence. It looped in my head, an unsolvable riddle. What happened out there? What did he mean? I can see you. I'm right here. Why the keys gone, but the truck left? None of it added up, no matter how many times I turned it over in my mind. It was a loose thread snagged on the edge of my consciousness, and I couldn't stop pulling at it. Other calls came and went, emergencies handled, routines followed, but the Lawson call remained an anomaly, a disruption in the expected order of things. Then, maybe 4 or 5 months after Brandon vanished, the department got an upgrade. New computer terminals, faster network, and bundled with it, some fancy new audio software. State-of-the-art noise reduction and enhancement stuff, meant to help us pull clearer information from bad calls, accidents with engine noise, domestics with TVs blaring, stuff like that. Most of the deputies just saw it as another piece of tech to learn, another password to forget. But when I saw the demo, saw how I could filter out background interference, isolate voices, enhance faint sounds, my first thought, instant and sharp, was Brandon Lawson. It felt a bit like grave robbing, professionally speaking. The case was cold, dormant. Pulling up that call felt obsessive. Maybe even a little morbid. But the need to understand, to find something concrete in that chaotic recording, overruled my hesitation. One particularly slow Tuesday night, when the phones were silent and the only sound was the ticking clock and the low hum of the servers, I did it. I navigated through the archived digital recordings, my pulse quickening slightly as I located the file. Lawson, B. 911 call, timestamped from that night last fall. My hands felt cold as I loaded it into the new software. I put on my good headset, the one that cups fully over the ears, blocking out everything else. I hit play on the raw recording first. And there it was again, the wall of static, the desperate, fragmented words, the sheer panic. It was just as unsettling as I remembered. Then, I started applying the filters. Noise reduction first, dialing it in carefully, watching the waveform on the screen change. The thick blanket of static began to recede, like a tide pulling away from the shore. Brandon's voice emerged, clearer now. Still panicked, still desperate, but the words were more distinct. Just pushed some guys over, he definitely said that. And later, unmistakably, I accidentally ran into him. The contradiction was starker now, more baffling. I could hear the gasping breaths between words, the raw terror straining his vocal cords. The loud pop was still there, sharp and sudden. His final "no, I need the cops" was just as clear, just as disturbingly calm. But clarifying the words didn't solve anything. It just highlighted the inconsistencies, the sheer strangeness of it all. Disappointment started to creep in. Maybe this was all there was. Just a tragic, confusing event with no answers forthcoming. I almost closed the program. But then, I decided to try amplifying the background, listening around his voice, trying to isolate anything else the filters might have uncovered in the space the static used to occupy. I pushed the gain, focusing intently, straining my ears against the residual hiss. That's when I heard the first sound. It was subtle at first, hiding beneath the peaks and troughs of Brandon's strained breathing. A faint, rhythmic clicking. Click, click, click. Click, click, click. It was incredibly fast, unnervingly regular. It wasn't machinery, not like engine noise or radio interference. It wasn't geological, like rocks falling. It sounded organic, but wrong. My mind immediately jumped to insects, the frantic clicking of huge mandibles, something chitinous and alien skittering just out of sight. Or maybe dry bones, clicking together like macabre wind chimes. Click, click, click. It was persistent, riding underneath his entire panic monologue, only momentarily drowned out by the loudest static bursts or his own shouted words. I isolated a section of the audio where Brandon wasn't speaking, just breathing hard. The clicking was there, clearer now. Click, click, click. Steady, relentless, utterly non-human. A cold dread, colder than the stale air conditioning blowing from the vent above, trickled down my spine. What the hell was that? I kept listening, rewinding, playing it again and again. The clicking was undeniable, disturbing, but it wasn't the worst part. As I focused harder, trying to filter out the clicking itself, concentrating on the very lowest frequencies the software could pull from the background hiss, I heard it. Woven into the very fabric of the remaining noise, almost subliminal, was something else. Something that made the clicking sound almost benign by comparison. It was laughter. But not human laughter. Not joyful, not angry, not even maniacal in any recognizable way. It was soft, wet, gurgling, almost, like liquid moving through rotten tissue. It was low, intermittent, hiding between the clicks and behind Brandon's terrified gasps. It was mocking, predatory, ancient somehow. It sounded amused. Amused by the terror in Brandon's voice. Amused by the chase. It was the sound of something utterly devoid of empathy, enjoying the hunt. My blood ran cold. I ripped the headset off, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The silence of the dispatch room rushed back in, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt thick, charged with the echoes of what I just heard. The clicking. That laughter. It wasn't just static. It wasn't just a bad line. Those sounds had been there, in the field, in the woods, with Brandon. Whatever chased him, whatever he ran into or pushed over, it wasn't just some guys. It was something else. Something heralded by clicks and wet, gurgling amusement. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the enhanced audio file still open. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend I never heard it, dismiss it as an auditory hallucination brought on by lack of sleep and too much coffee. But I knew better. I knew what I heard was real. I saved the enhanced file under a different name, buried deep in a personal folder, password protected. Evidence of... I didn't know what. Sleep didn't come easy that night, or for many nights after. Every creak of the owls sounded like clicking. Every distant dog bark sounded momentarily like that soft, wet chuckle. Back at work, the long stretches of silence on the night shift became unbearable. The low hum of the equipment seemed to pulse rhythmically. Sometimes, when it was dead quiet, just before a call came in, I thought I could hear it, faint and far away, through the open line of my headset. Click, click, click. Was it memory? Trauma? Or was it something else? Was the echo of that night somehow lingering? I started researching. Late nights, off duty, I scoured local history archives, looked into folklore from the area, searched for reports of strange animal encounters, anything. Found plenty of ghost stories, tall tales about phantom lights and creatures in the woods, but nothing that matched the specific sounds, nothing that felt connected to Brandon's disappearance. It only deepened the mystery, and my own quiet, creeping fear. I was alone with this knowledge, this auditory horror. Telling anyone, Miller, the sheriff, anyone, felt impossible. They think I was crazy, stressed out, hearing things. Maybe I was. But the memory of that wet laughter, bubbling up from the static, felt far too real. Brandon hadn't just gotten lost or met with foul play in the conventional sense. He'd stumbled into something ancient and awful out there in the dark, and the proof was hidden in the noise, a terrifying secret only I knew. The question that kept me awake now wasn't just what happened to Brandon, but were those sounds truly gone? Or had listening too closely somehow invited them in? It's late again. Past midnight. The digital clock on the console glows 1:15 a.m., casting stark green numbers into the gloom of the dispatch office. Outside, Cook County is wrapped in a thick, moonless dark. The wind died down hours ago, leaving behind a silence so profound it feels like the world is holding its breath. It's the kind of quiet that presses in on you, makes the hum of the computer tower sound like a roar and the beat of your own heart feel unnervingly loud in your ears. It's a night much like the one last fall when Brandon Lawson called. Too much like it. I've been on edge all shift. Every distant car engine, every rustle of leaves against the window pane puts my teeth on edge. Ever since enhancing that damned recording, the quiet hasn't felt safe anymore. It feels watchful, charged, like static electricity building up before a lightning strike. I tell myself it's just nerves, lack of sleep, too much caffeine. But the memory of that clicking, that wet, gurgling laughter I unearthed from the static, it's never far away. A cold certainty settled in my gut months ago. Whatever happened to Brandon wasn't human. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the world outside is utterly still, I feel like I'm sitting on the edge of whatever abyss swallowed him whole. Force of habit, more than anything else, makes me reach for my headset. I slide it over my ears, the familiar cup sealing out the low hum of the room, leaving only the faint electronic hiss of an open, silent line. Just habit. Checking the connection. Staying ready. That's what I tell myself. But maybe, deep down, some morbid part of me is listening for something. Waiting. And tonight, the silence listens back. It starts subtly. A faint crackle through the headset, like dust settling on an old vinyl record. Not unusual, necessarily. Old equipment, rural county budget. But this static, it feels familiar. It has the same texture, the same underlying hiss as the static on Brandon's call. My hand freezes over the keyboard. I stop breathing, straining to hear. It's not coming from an incoming call. The lines are all dead. It's just there, materializing out of the ether. Then, underneath the static, so faint I almost convince myself I'm imagining it, I hear it. Click. A pause. Click, click. It's distant, like it's coming from miles away, down a long, dark tunnel. My blood turns to ice water in my veins. No, not again. It's memory. It has to be memory. An auditory hallucination triggered by stress and the familiar setting. But it doesn't stop. Click, click, click. It's getting louder. More distinct. Faster now, losing the slight hesitancy it had at first. Click, 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 click. It's the same rhythm I heard on the recording, the sound of something utterly alien and wrong. It's not memory. It's now. It's live, feeding directly into my ears through the headset. I check the console frantically, punching buttons, scanning the frequencies. Nothing. No open mics, no cross signals, no logical explanation. Just the empty line, the familiar static, and that impossible, growing clicking. Click, 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 click. It's filling my ears, a frantic, chitinous rhythm drilling into my skull. Panic claws its way up my throat. My heart is slamming against my ribs so hard it hurts. I should rip the headset off. I should run. but I'm frozen, transfixed by the sheer impossibility of it. And then it gets worse. Woven into the clicking, emerging from the static like a corpse rising from murky water, comes the laughter. That soft, wet, gurgling sound. No longer faint, no longer hiding. It's clear now. Chillingly clear. Right there in my ears, intimate and predatory. It's amused, somehow, bubbling with horrific, liquid mirth. It's laughing at the clicking, laughing at the static, laughing at me. At my terror. Get out. My own voice is a strangled croak in the silent room, swallowed instantly by the oppressive quiet and the noise in my head. With a strangled cry, I rip the headset off my head and throw it onto the console, the plastic clattering loudly. My ears are ringing. I'm breathing hard, gasping for air, eyes darting around the dimly lit office. The silence rushes back in, heavy and absolute. For a second, there's nothing. Just the pounding of my own blood. Maybe it was the headset. Malfunction. Feedback loop. Stress. But the silence doesn't last. Click. It's faint. And it's not coming from the headset anymore. It's coming from the corner of the room. Near the filing cabinets, where the shadows are deepest. Click, click. From the air vent above my head. Click, click, click. From the darkened window, reflecting only my own wide-eyed terror. The clicking is in the room. Soft at first, then louder, echoing from multiple points at once, surrounding me. A skittering, clicking nightmare manifesting out of the shadows. And then, the laughter joins it. Not through wires and speakers, but seemingly bleeding from the walls themselves. A wet, gurgling sound that slides over my skin like something cold and viscous. It's everywhere now. Behind me. Beside me. Inside my own head. This isn't real. It can't be real. My mind is fracturing, stress finally pushing me over the edge. But the sounds, they are so sharp, so present. The clicking is like fingernails tapping frantically on glass, just on the other side of reality. The laughter is a suffocating presence, thick with ancient malice. The air grows heavy, cold. The lights on the console flicker erratically. I stumble back, chair scraping loudly across the floor. My eyes dart towards the door, the only way out. My hand fumbles for the radio handset, a lifeline. I lift it, press the transmit button, my thumb slick with sweat. Dispatch to any unit, requesting immediate. The radio crackles violently. Not with a voice, but with that static. Brandon's static. And through it, amplified, deafening now, comes the clicking, faster and faster, a frantic, impossible barrage of sound. And the laughter. Oh God, the laughter. It pours out of the radio speaker, wet and triumphant, drowning out everything else. I drop the handset like it's burning hot. The sounds don't stop. They intensify. Clicking from the floor, the ceiling, the walls. Laughter echoing in the enclosed space, thick and suffocating. It feels like the room itself is chuckling, contracting around me. I can feel it now, a presence just beyond the edge of sight, lurking in the deepening shadows, heralded by the clicking, cloaked in that awful, what amusement. Whatever was with Brandon that night, whatever answered his call, it heard me listening. And now it's here. I back away further, stumbling against the wall. My eyes are fixed on the darkest corner of the room, where the shadows seem to coalesce, deepen, almost move. The clicking is right behind me now, sharp, distinct, like tiny, hard points tapping directly onto the back of my neck. The laughter swells, filling my ears, my head, the world. It's the last thing I hear. My name's Alex Johnson. It's not a name that'll turn heads or feature in any headlines, which suits me just fine. I'm what you might call a collector of lost things. Not in a grand, museum curator sense. More like a bottom feeder of forgotten histories. Old books with cracked spines and inscriptions to long-dead lovers, stacks of sepia-toned photographs capturing moments no one living remembers, tarnished lockets, single cufflinks, chipped porcelain dolls with vacant stares, the detritus of lives concluded, the things people leave behind when they move on, or pass on. My weekends are rituals of dust and discovery, spent trawling the sprawling tables of estate sales under the unforgiving Australian sun, or navigating the claustrophobic aisles of second-hand shops crammed floor to ceiling with the unwanted and the overlooked. There's a peculiar thrill in it, like sifting through sedimentary layers of time, finding a tangible piece of someone else's narrative. Sometimes it's poignant, sometimes mundane, occasionally unsettling. This particular hunt began a few months back, on a blustery Saturday down near Somerton Beach, just outside Adelaide. There's a certain weight to the air around Somerton, a kind of historical melancholy that clings to the place, even decades after its most famous mystery. Maybe it was just the salt spray and the cries of the gulls, but I always feel a little watched there. The estate sale was in one of those older, slightly faded bungalows set back from the esplanade, the kind that smells faintly of lavender polish and mothballs. The usual assortment was laid out, sensible furniture, sensible china, sensible lives packed into cardboard boxes. But tucked away on a rickety bookshelf in a dim back room, crammed between Reader's Digest condensed volumes and outdated travel guides, was something that immediately snagged my attention. It was a book. A small, unassuming copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. What made me pause was its specificity. The binding was a faded burgundy cloth, slightly frayed at the corners, but the title wasn't just a standard Rubaiyat. The spine, in faint gold lettering, specified it as a particular New Zealand edition. Small, niche, definitely not something you'd expect to find casually lying around in an Adelaide Beach suburb. It looked old, properly old, the kind of old where the pages have yellowed to the color of weak tea and the binding glue smells faintly acidic. It felt like it hadn't been opened in decades, the cover slightly stiff, resisting my touch. There was no price tag on it. When I asked the weary-looking woman overseeing the sale, she just shrugged and said, "Oh, that old thing? $5. Sold." There was an odd lack of sentiment, almost a haste, in the way she took my money, barely looking at the book itself. I didn't think too much of it on the drive home, tossing it onto the passenger seat with a couple of other minor finds, a tin of old buttons, a framed print of ships that probably wasn't worth anything. It was only later that evening, back in the quiet solitude of my apartment, surrounded by my own curated collection of echoes, that I picked it up again. The air in my apartment always feels thick with unspoken stories, but holding this specific Rubaiyat felt different. There was a static charge to it, a low hum of significance that prickled the skin on my fingertips. I settled into my favorite armchair, the one perpetually draped in shadows regardless of the time of day, and carefully opened the book. The pages crackled softly, releasing the distinctive scent of aged paper and dust. I flipped through, admiring the typeset, the feel of the thick, slightly rough paper. Then, near the back, tucked loosely between the final quatrain and the end paper, I found it. It wasn't a bookmark. It looked like a page, or rather, a fragment of a page that had been torn out from somewhere else. It was blank, brittle, and slightly smaller than the book's own pages. Odd, but not unheard of. People tuck things into books all the time. Recipes, notes, pressed flowers. But as I carefully lifted the fragment, something else caught my eye. It was the page behind where the fragment had rested. It wasn't ink, not exactly. It was indentations. Deep, clear impressions pressed into the paper, ghosts of letters written long ago on the missing page, the pressure of the pen or pencil transferring through. Someone had written heavily, urgently, on that now vanished sheet. Curiosity, the driving force of my peculiar hobby, surged through me, sharp and insistent. This wasn't just a forgotten shopping list. This felt deliberate. I hesitated for only a moment. Grabbing a soft-leaded pencil from my desk, I gently laid the indented page flat. Using the side of the pencil lead, I began to lightly rub across the surface, the technique familiar from childhood brass rubbings. Slowly, like developing a photograph in a darkroom, faint shapes began to emerge from the blankness. Letters. Capital letters, stark and blocky against the yellow paper. They were jumbled, disordered, forming no discernible words or pattern at first glance. Marco babbed. Yowie. It tapped some. There were more, faint traces below, but these lines were the clearest, the most deeply impressed. My brow furrowed. It looked like a code. Random strings of letters. It tickled a memory, something filed away in the recesses of my mind, a connection I couldn't immediately place. It felt familiar, disturbingly so. Why would a nonsensical code be tucked away in an old New Zealand edition of the Rubaiyat found near Somerton Beach? Then it hit me. The location. The book. The code. My fingers flew across my laptop keyboard, typing shaky words into the search bar, Rubaiyat Code Adelaide. The results flooded the screen, stark and chilling. The Somerton Man. The enduring Australian mystery. The unidentified body found slumped against the seawall at Somerton Beach, December 1st, 1948. Dressed impeccably, labels cut from his clothing, no identification. The discovery, weeks later, of a tiny scrap of paper concealed in a hidden fob pocket of his trousers, bearing only the typed words Tamam should. It meant it is ended or finished, the final phrase from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Police launched a public appeal, eventually tracing the scrap to a specific, rare edition of the book, a copy handed in by a local man who found it tossed onto the back seat of his unlocked car around the time of the man's death. And in the back of that book, pencil markings. Faint lines of capital letters, believed to be a coded message. A code that, despite decades of scrutiny by amateur and professional cryptographers, including military intelligence, had never been deciphered. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pulled up images of the original code found in the Somerton Man's Rubaiyat. My blood ran cold. The style of the letters, the block capitals, the approximate length of the lines, the indentations on my page looked terrifyingly similar. Not just similar, They looked identical to the photos online, the same strange jumble of letters staring back at me from my screen and from the page under my pencil rubbing. Go babbed. Mliawi. It taps him. It was the Somerton man's code. Could this be another copy connected to the case? A practice run? Or, the thought sent an electric shock down my spine, could this somehow be the copy? Unlikely. The original was supposedly found and held by police, but the New Zealand edition detail, maybe there was more than one significant copy? Maybe the found fragment wasn't torn from the book itself, but was the paper lent on while writing in the book. The possibilities spun wildly, blurring the lines of logic and plunging me headfirst into obsession. The next few days passed in a fugue state. Sleep became an afterthought, meals were forgotten. My apartment, usually a haven of quiet contemplation, transformed into a command center dedicated to cracking a 75-year-old enigma. The book lay open on my desk, radiating a palpable sense of cold importance. I scoured websites, forums, old newspaper archives, absorbing every detail of the Somerton man case. I printed out the code, transcribed it endlessly, staring at the letters until they swam before my eyes. I tried every decryption method I could find. Substitution ciphers, checking letter frequencies against standard English, against other languages. I explored acrostics, trying to link the letters to the first words of lines or verses in the Rubaiyat itself, a common theory, given the Tamamshud clue. I researched the nurse, Jessica Thompson, often referred to pseudonymously as Jestin, whose phone number was found penciled in the back of the original book and who seemed evasive when questioned, claiming she'd given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man named Alfred Boxall, who was found alive and well, still possessing his copy. I tried using her name, Boxall's name, dates related to the case, anything I could think of as a potential key. Nothing. The code remained stubbornly opaque, a locked door defying every key I threw at it. But it was worse than just being unsolved. It felt alive. Malevolent, almost. Sometimes, in the periphery of my vision, or when I glanced back after looking away, the letters seemed to subtly shift, to rearrange themselves before resolving back into the familiar, meaningless jumble. I blamed sleep deprivation, eye strain. But the feeling persisted. Once, staring intently at the second line, Mliawi, the letters seemed to shimmer, to momentarily coalesce into something chillingly coherent. I am alive. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and it was back to Mliawi, meaningless, mocking. Was I losing my mind? Amidst the prominent indentations of the code, I started to notice something else, something incredibly faint, almost missed. Below the main lines of the code, barely visible even under direct light, were the faintest impressions of numbers. A phone number. It was difficult to make out, pressed much more lightly than the code letters. It took me ages, tilting the page under a lamp, using a magnifying glass, to be sure. It wasn't the X3239 number linked to Jessica Thompson, the one widely reported in the case files. This was different. 7 digits. An old Adelaide number, judging by the format. My hand trembled as I wrote it down. Logic dictated it was probably defunct, disconnected decades ago. A dead end. But logic had deserted me days ago, replaced by the pull of the mystery, the cold grip of the book. On sheer, reckless impulse, I picked up my mobile phone and dialed the number. My breath caught in my throat. It connected. It rang. Once. twice. Then, a distinct click, the sound of an old line engaging. Silence for a heartbeat. And then, a voice whispered, directly into my ear, bypassing the phone entirely, it seemed. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering across concrete, ancient and desiccated. It spoke only 2 words, words that echoed the mystery that had consumed me, words that froze the marrow in my bones. Tamam should. The line went dead immediately, leaving only the dial tone humming in my ear. A profound, unnatural chill radiated outwards from the book on the desk, permeating the room, sinking into my skin. It was colder than any winter draft, an absolute absence of warmth. I physically recoiled, pushing my chair back, trying to shake off the icy dread that had settled over me. I stood up, needing to move, to escape the sudden, suffocating presence in the room. I glanced down, absently brushing at my jeans. And I froze. Utterly, completely frozen. Sticking out, just barely visible from the tiny, useless fob pocket on my jeans, the one nobody ever uses, the one I certainly hadn't put anything into, was the corner of a tiny, tightly rolled up scrap of paper. Time seemed to stutter, then fracture. One moment, I was reeling from the disembodied whisper on the phone line. The next, my fingers were tracing the impossible outline of that tiny roll of paper nestled in my fob pocket. My blood turned to slush. I never used that pocket. It's a vestigial flap of denim, a sartorial appendix. I checked it reflexively sometimes when doing laundry, always finding it empty, a small void. Until now. How? The question hammered silently against my skull. Had it been planted? When? At the estate sale? By the woman who barely looked at me? Or had it materialized? The thought was insane, violating every rational principle I clung to, yet the physical reality of the paper was undeniable, rough and foreign against my trembling fingertips. With excruciating slowness, as if handling unstable ordnance, I coaxed the tightly wound scroll from the pocket. It was old paper, that much was clear, brittle, slightly rough, the color of old parchment. It felt contemporary with the Rubaiyat, sharing its aura of age and forgotten purpose. My breath hitched as I carefully unrolled it on the desk, weighting the curling ends down with a heavy glass paperweight and a Somerton Man case file I'd printed out. It wasn't code this time. No jumbled letters, no numbers. It was a single word, written in the same blocky capitals as the indentations in the book, looking like it had been scrawled with the same heavy pressure. One word, stark and terrifying in its implication, echoing the hallucination, or perhaps the clarification I'd experienced earlier. Alive. Just that. Alive. My mind raced, trying to wrench meaning from it. Was it a message from the Somerton Man, a spectral declaration across the decades? Was it a threat? A statement about the book itself, or the entity that whispered through the phone? Was it connected to the shifting letters, the meowie that had seemed to warp into AM alive? Had I not been hallucinating after all? The words sat there on the fragile paper, mocking my attempts at logical interpretation. It felt less like a communication and more like a brand, seared into the narrative I had stumbled into. The discovery of the paper tipped me over an edge. The initial thrill of the historical puzzle, the academic curiosity, evaporated, replaced by a primal, knowing fear. My apartment, once my sanctuary filled with the gentle ghosts of the past, now felt hostile, compromised. I started checking the locks obsessively, peering through the peephole before opening the door, jumping at every creak of the floorboards or groan of the plumbing. I felt watched, constantly. Not by human eyes, necessarily, but by something patient, ancient, and deeply connected to the burgundy cloth-bound book that now sat on my desk like a malignant artifact. The coldness emanating from it seemed to pulse, sometimes receding to a mere background chill, other times intensifying until my teeth chattered and goosebumps prickled my arms, even in the warmth of the room. Sleep offered no escape. When exhaustion finally claimed me, my dreams were a chaotic reel of gray, windswept beaches, indecipherable letters twisting like serpents, and the dry, sibilant whisper of Tamamshud echoing from just behind my ear. I'd wake up gasping, heart pounding, the single word alive burning behind my eyelids. My research became frantic, desperate. I wasn't just trying to solve a historical mystery anymore. I was trying to understand what had latched onto me. I dug deeper into the specifics of the New Zealand edition of the Rubaiyat. Were there other known copies linked to strange occurrences? Information was scarce, fragmented. It was a limited run by a small Auckland publisher in the 1930s. No glaring anomalies reported, but archives were incomplete, records lost to time. I tried tracing the provenance of my copy, contacting the company that handled the estate sale. They were oddly obstructive. The woman I spoke to claimed they kept minimal records of individual items, especially low-value ones like old books. She didn't recall the specific house sale near Somerton Beach clearly. They did so many, and suggested the previous owners likely moved interstate or passed away, leaving no relatives. It felt like hitting a series of softly closing doors, each encounter leaving me with a stronger sense of deliberate obfuscation. The book itself seemed to resist documentation. I tried photographing the indented page again, hoping better light or a different angle might reveal more. When I compared the new photos to the initial pencil rubbing in my earlier pictures, there were subtle, undeniable differences. Letters seemed slightly thicker or thinner, the spacing minutely altered. The second line, Mliaui, sometimes looked distinctly more like the chilling AM alive, depending on the light and angle, as if the underlying impression was fluid, unstable. One evening, trying to meticulously transcribe the code onto fresh paper, my hand seized with an agonizing cramp as I reached the second line, forcing me to drop the pen. The faint, almost subliminal vibration I sometimes felt when touching the cover seemed stronger now, a low thrum of contained energy. It wasn't just an object, it was a vessel. And it felt like it was aware of my attention. What about the phone number? The one that had yielded the whisper? I tried calling it again, multiple times over the next few days. It never rang. Each time, I got an immediate dead tone, that flat, final sound of absolute disconnection. It was more unnerving than a standard number unobtainable message. It felt like the line hadn't just been disconnected, it had been erased. My online research into its history yielded frustratingly little. Records from that era were patchy. One database suggested the number prefix might have been allocated to a government exchange near the Adelaide CBD, possibly linked to Defense Department buildings demolished in the 1970s. Another, more dubious source on an obscure forum claimed numbers like that were sometimes used by short-lived special projects operating out of temporary facilities, sanatoriums, repurposed warehouses during the early Cold War. Whispers of espionage, the recurring, shadowy theme woven through the Somerton Man theories, seemed to cling to this dead phone line. The feeling of being watched intensified, bleeding out from the confines of my apartment. I attempted to share my findings anonymously on a secure cryptology forum, carefully detailing the book, the code similarities, the phone call, omitting only the inexplicable paper. I hit submit. The post seemed to appear for a second, then vanished. An error message flashed, invalid submission. I tried again. Same result. It felt like automated censorship, but faster, more targeted. A few days later, standing at my window, looking down at the street, I saw him. A figure standing across the road, partially obscured by a tree, just watching my building. Not looking at a phone, not waiting for anyone, just standing, unnaturally still. He was too far away to make out features, just a silhouette in a nondescript coat, but something about his posture felt wrong, predatory. When I leaned forward, trying to get a better look, he simply turned and walked away, melting into the sparse pedestrian traffic with an unnerving fluidity. He didn't look back. The final illusion of control shattered late one night. The air in the apartment was thick with the book's icy aura. I hadn't slept properly in what felt like weeks. Nightmares and paranoia bled into waking hours. I was pacing, rubbing my temples, trying to force some rational explanation, when my gaze fell upon the windowsill. Sitting there, placed neatly parallel to the frame, was a cigarette butt. It wasn't mine. I don't smoke. It was an old style, unfiltered, with a brand name I dimly recognized from the Somerton Man case files, Kensitas. The exact brand, notoriously expensive and unusual for Australia at the time, that detectives had noted finding near the body on Somerton Beach, although they couldn't definitively link them to the deceased. It hadn't been there an hour ago. The window was closed, locked. There was no rational way for it to be there. As I stared at it, the small, mundane object radiating sheer impossibility, the cold in the room coalesced. It dropped several degrees in seconds. And then I heard it again. Not from the phone this time. It was closer. Right beside me. The same dry, ancient whisper, seeming to emanate from the very air around the rubaiyat lying open on the desk. It wasn't Tamamshud this time. It was softer, almost conversational, yet filled with an ancient malice. Not finished. In that moment, the horrifying truth crystallized. I wasn't an observer peering into a cold case. I wasn't a collector who'd found a curious artifact. I was involved. Somehow, inexplicably, I had become part of the pattern, a new variable in an equation that was decades old and still terrifyingly active. The mystery wasn't dead and buried in 1948. It was alive. And now, it seemed, it knew my name. The boundary between night and day blurred into a single, gray continuum of fear. Sleep was a forgotten luxury, replaced by jolting exhaustion and the ceaseless, low-level hum of dread emanating from the rubaiyat. The cigarette butt on the windowsill was the final punctuation mark on my sanity. It wasn't just a clue anymore. It was a calling card, a deliberate, impossible intrusion into my lockdown world. The whisper, not finished, echoed not just in the room, but inside my own skull. I was trapped, not just within the four walls of my apartment, but within a narrative that was actively rewriting itself around me, with me as an unwilling character. Passivity was no longer an option. Waiting to see what happened next felt like waiting for a tide to drown me. I had to act. I had to force a confrontation, even if I had no idea what that truly meant. But how? Destroying the book felt like swatting a wasp's nest, a violent, unpredictable act that could unleash something far worse. Returning it seemed futile, or would I even take it? The estate sale was a ghost, the organizers elusive. Fleeing felt like the most rational choice, but the appearance of the paper, the cigarette butt, these suggested that physical distance might be irrelevant. Whatever this was, it wasn't bound by conventional rules. No, the only path forward, terrifying as it was, seemed to be engagement. I had stumbled upon the pieces, the book, the code, the whisper, the word alive. Maybe they weren't just clues to a historical event, maybe they were components of a ritual, parts of a lock waiting for the right key, in the right place. Understanding wasn't just for solving the past anymore, it was about surviving the present. And the source, the epicenter of this whole chilling affair, was Somerton Beach. A grim resolve settled over me, cold and heavy as the book itself. I gathered the items, the faded burgundy rubaiyat, the pencil rubbing of the code, the brittle scrap of paper bearing the stark word alive. Handling them sent shivers down my spine, a mixture of revulsion and compelled fascination. I placed them carefully in a canvas bag. My plan, such as it was, felt born more of desperation than strategy. Go to Somerton Beach at dusk, near the spot where the unidentified man was found slumped against the seawall 70-odd years ago. Bring the elements together. See what happened. It was madness, akin to poking a sleeping leviathan, but the alternative, waiting for the unseen forces to escalate further within the confines of my home, felt infinitely worse. The drive to the coast was surreal. Familiar streets seemed warped, imbued with a quiet menace. Every flickering streetlight, every rustle of wind-blown leaves against the car window, seemed like a potential omen. On a normally busy intersection, all the traffic lights turned red simultaneously, holding me there for an unnervingly long moment in a pocket of enforced silence. Glancing towards a bus stop I passed, I saw him again, the indistinct figure in the nondescript coat, standing unnaturally still, head turned slightly towards my passing car before melting back into the urban camouflage. Was it the same person? Or just my frayed nerves painting patterns onto strangers? The air grew heavier, colder, thick with the scent of salt and something else, something ancient and expectant, as I approached the coast. Somerton Beach at dusk was bleakly beautiful and utterly desolate. The sky was a canvas of bruised purples and fading oranges bleeding into gray. The waves hissed against the sand, a relentless, rhythmic sigh. The wind whipped strands of hair across my face, carrying a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air and everything to do with the spot I was approaching. I walked towards the section of seawall mentioned in the old police reports, the place where history, mystery, and tragedy converged. The few dog walkers and strolling couples seemed miles away, phantoms on the periphery of my isolated reality. Reaching the approximate spot, I stopped. The weight of the past felt crushing here, a tangible presence. With trembling hands, I took the items from my bag. I laid the pencil rubbing of the code on the cold concrete of the low sea wall. Beside it, I placed the fragile paper with its single, capitalized word, alive. Finally, I opened the rubaiyat, its pages fluttering weakly in the wind. The air grew still. The ceaseless sound of the waves seemed to recede, muffled, as if the world was holding its breath. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I pulled out my phone. One last time. I dialed the number, the faint sequence of digits etched into my memory. As expected, the dead, flat tone answered immediately. No whisper this time. just silence. Then, steeling myself, I looked at the rubbing and read the code aloud, my voice thin and reedy against the vastness of the beach and the sea. Orko babbed. Mliawi. Itapsum. The moment the last letter left my lips, the wind died completely. An unnatural calm descended. I held up the scrap of paper. Alive, I whispered, the word feeling alien and powerful on my tongue. There was no spectral figure, no booming voice from the heavens. Instead, something infinitely more terrifying happened. Understanding flooded my mind. It wasn't a thought process, it was a download, an infusion of cold, sharp knowledge directly into my consciousness. Images, feelings, concepts, none of them mine. The code wasn't a substitution cipher, not an acrostic, not a message from someone in the traditional sense. It was a key, a sequence, an algorithm for persistence, for transference. A way to imprint a consciousness, or the dregs of one, onto something or someone else. Alive wasn't a statement about the Somerton man. It was an instruction, the trigger, the final affirmation needed to complete the circuit. The Somerton man hadn't just died, he had been a vessel, perhaps one of many, in a desperate, ongoing cycle of attempted continuation. Jessica Thompson, the nurse, perhaps she wasn't just an evasive witness, but a guardian of the process, or a failed participant herself. The whisper, Taman should, wasn't the voice of the dead, it was the mocking counterpoint, the ending this process perpetually fought against. And the second whisper, not finished, that was the process itself, asserting its ongoing nature. This wasn't about Cold War spies or hidden identities in the way the newspapers theorized. This was older, stranger. A desperate, arcane clinging to existence, a refusal to accept the end. The cost, the method, the implications, they washed over me in a chilling wave of comprehension that felt utterly alien, yet terrifyingly intimate. The profound cold I had felt emanating from the book wasn't just an external chill anymore. It was seeping into me, integrating with my own warmth, changing me from the inside out. The flood of alien knowledge receded, leaving me shivering violently on the darkening beach, yet paradoxically calm. The gnawing fear had been replaced by a vast, hollow emptiness, a sense of inevitability. I looked down at the rubaiyat in my hands. It no longer felt like a separate object. The cold was gone, replaced by a neutral familiarity, like rediscovering a lost part of oneself. Slowly, I stood up. I gathered the papers, tucking them back into the book. Then, I turned. Not back towards the road, towards the lights and the remnants of my old life. I turned towards the sea, towards the deepening twilight swallowing the horizon. I started walking, slowly, deliberately, towards the water's edge, the damp sand cool beneath my feet. The rhythmic hiss of the waves sounded like a welcome. Alex Johnson was reported missing by their landlord several weeks later. Their apartment was found unlocked, undisturbed, save for scattered research notes on the Somerton man case covering the desk. The specific New Zealand edition of the rubaiyat was gone. Police investigations yielded no leads. Months passed. Then, in a dusty second-hand bookshop in Melbourne, nestled between forgotten biographies, a small, burgundy cloth-bound copy of the rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam appeared. A specific New Zealand edition. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades, waiting patiently for the next collector, the next curious soul. Waiting for the cycle to continue. Inside the back cover, almost too faint to see, below the ghost impressions of block capital letters, a new, barely perceptible whisper of graphite seemed to have joined the old marks. It simply read, "Not yet." My name's Sarah Chen. If you ever pictured the kind of person who ends up working the graveyard shift surrounded by dead trees and fading ink, you probably wouldn't be far off imagining me. 5 nights a week, I inhabit the hushed, climate-controlled tomb of the San Francisco Chronicle's archives. It's not glamorous. Mostly, it's me, the low, persistent hum of the digitization scanners, the ghostly glow of the microfilm readers, and enough lukewarm coffee to float a small battleship. The air always smells faintly of decaying paper, dust, and something vaguely acidic, the scent of history slowly dissolving. You get used to it, the quiet solitude. Some nights, it's almost peaceful, like being the last person awake in the world, entrusted with the city's forgotten memories. Other nights, especially when the fog rolls in thick off the bay and presses against the basement windows, the silence feels heavier, charged with the weight of all the stories filed away down here. Tragedies, scandals, unsolved mysteries, lives lived and ended, all reduced to brittle paper and flickering images on a screen. My main task is digitizing old microfilm reels, turning fragile, yellowing newspaper pages into searchable data. It's meticulous, painstaking work. Page after page of grainy text and photos, advertisements for products nobody remembers, headlines shouting about events that now feel like ancient history. You see names flare up briefly in scandals or triumphs, then vanish. You trace the rise and fall of neighborhoods, the shifting moods of the city. Usually, it's monotonous enough to make your eyelids feel like lead weights by 3 a.m. But sometimes, you stumble across something that reminds you these aren't just records. They're fragments of real lives, real traumas. Last week started like any other. Fueled by caffeine and the slightly melancholic drone of the ventilation system, I was working my way through a backlog of unprocessed materials, stuff that had somehow missed the standard cataloging decades ago. This particular batch was a collection of cardboard boxes labeled simply correspondence, unfiled, late 60s/early 70s. It was a chaotic jumble, reader complaints, letters to the editor that never ran, inter-office memos, tips from cranks, junk mail addressed to reporters long dead or retired. It was the kind of box you could lose yourself in, a time capsule of unfiltered public opinion and newsroom ephemera. Mostly, it was dull, arguments about zoning laws, praise for a columnist's recent piece, angry denials from local politicians. I was about 3 boxes deep, sometime around 2 a.m. on Wednesday, when my fingers brushed against something different. Not the standard office stationery or stiff newsprint, but a cheap, flimsy envelope. The kind you buy in bulk at a 5-and-dime store. It was slightly yellowed, addressed in sloppy, uneven typing to simply Editor, SF Chronicle. No specific person named. The postmark was faded but legible, San Francisco, California, October. I squinted, looked like 69. 1969. The height of, well, a lot of things. But one name immediately snagged in the back of my mind. My heart gave a weird little lurch, a flutter of unwelcome recognition. Still, it was probably nothing. Crank mail was common, especially back then. I slit the envelope open carefully with a standard letter opener, trying not to damage the brittle paper further. Inside was a single sheet of equally cheap, thin typing paper, folded crudely in thirds. The typing was even worse than on the envelope, letters punched unevenly, some too faint, Some struck so hard they almost tore through the page. The spacing was erratic, words jammed together or floating islands in a sea of white space. And the tone. It wasn't like the Zodiac letters that had made the Chronicle, and the whole Bay Area hold its breath in terror. Those were boastful, taunting, filled with a chillingly articulate menace and demands for publication. This was different. It felt cruder. Angrier, yes, but also petulant, almost childish. Full of basic spelling errors, police for police, terrible for terrible, kill with 3 Ls. It rambled incoherently about being ignored, about needing to show them, about how everyone would be sorry. It didn't have the same chilling grandiosity as the published letters. It felt more like a desperate, almost pathetic, cry for attention, laced with venom. Then I saw the drawing at the bottom half of the page. Below the messy block of text, someone had drawn a picture with a simple black pen. It was rudimentary, almost like a child's drawing. A thick, unevenly drawn tree with sparse branches stood on one side. Beneath it, a stick figure. Just lines for arms and legs, a circle for a head. No features. And hovering directly over the stick figure's head, drawn with slightly more care, was the symbol. The circle with the crosshairs through it. The Zodiac symbol, circle plus. Seeing it there, scrawled on this cheap paper, linked to this incoherent rant, sent a genuine chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the archive's regulated temperature. But there was something else, tucked away at the very bottom of the page, beneath the drawing and the symbol. A short string of letters, typed in the same messy fashion. MLSVZMW RMV GSV URI GIVV ZUGV GSV HGLNVH. A cipher. My first thought was, no way. The Zodiac ciphers, especially the infamous 340-character one, were notoriously complex, baffling experts for decades. This looked short. Simple. Too simple? Curiosity overriding the unease for a moment, I grabbed a scrap piece of paper. This wasn't the Z340. It looked like a basic substitution cipher, maybe even a Caesar cipher or something similar. Given the childish tone and misspellings in the letter, complexity seemed unlikely. I started with frequency analysis. V appeared most often. In English, E is the most common letter. What if V equals E? Then G was also very frequent. Maybe G equals T? H could be H or A, S could be S. I plugged in a few common substitutions. NL became NO. SV became southeast, ZMW became end. ORMV became line. It clicked into place surprisingly fast. It was a simple substitution, a bash cipher, A equals C, B equals Y, etc., or something very close. Within maybe 10-15 minutes, hunched over under the green-shaded desk lamp, I had it deciphered. Noe and 9, the first tree after the stones. Coordinates. Not numerical latitude and longitude, but descriptive. Vague, yet specific enough to potentially pinpoint a location. Noe and 9? North, west, and 9? A street intersection? No, that didn't feel right. Maybe it was a local landmark code? Or maybe it referred to degrees. North by west, 9 degrees? Or just arbitrary markers? The first tree after the stones. What stones? Where? Driven by a weird mix of archival diligence and morbid fascination, I opened Google Maps on my workstation. The Chronicle building is downtown, but the Zodiac's known activity, the letters, the atmosphere, it always felt linked to the wider Bay Area, the parks, the lonely places. Or would stones and trees be prominent? Golden Gate Park was the obvious first thought. It's huge, full of trails, monuments, hidden spots. There are numerous rock formations, old stone bridges, path markers. I started panning across the satellite view, focusing on areas near water, areas that felt slightly more remote. Stowe Lake, Strawberry Hill. The Japanese tea garden has stones, but first tree after felt more natural, less landscaped. I zoomed in on the area around Stowe Lake, a place known for its paths, its island, its slightly eerie quietness at times. I virtually wandered the trails, looking for prominent stone features near pathways. And then I saw it, on the satellite view, near the western edge of the lake loop, a small cluster of rocks, almost like natural landscaping or perhaps remnants of an older path marker, right beside the main trail. And just after that cluster, heading northwest along the path, was a distinct, large tree standing slightly apart from its neighbors. The first tree after the stones. It matched. Tentatively, I dropped a pin. The coordinates weren't a specific numerical point, but the description led, with a bit of interpretation, to a tangible spot. A remote-feeling patch of green within the vastness of Golden Gate Park. Just trees, grass, a walking trail nearby, the lake visible through the foliage. Nothing inherently sinister on a map. But it felt off. Why this spot? Why encoded in such a simple cipher? Why was this letter, with its different tone and specific, locational clue, never published, never even seemingly filed properly? Was it intercepted? Dismissed? Lost? I showed the letter and my rudimentary decryption to my supervisor, Dave, when he came in for the morning shift handover. He glanced at it, raised an eyebrow at the symbol, read my notes. He shrugged, running a hand through his thinning hair. Huh. Weird. Probably just another Zodiac nut job, Sarah. We got tons of M back then, people sending in fake letters, confessions, theories. Explains why it was in the unfiled box. Someone probably opened it, saw the symbol, maybe couldn't crack the code easily or just figured it was garbage, and tossed it on the deal with later pile, which became the never deal with pile. He handed it back. Just document it, scan it like the rest. Note the cipher solution. But don't lose sleep over it. It's history. He was probably right. It was the most logical explanation. Just another piece of strange, unsettling history unearthed from the archives. Another crank letter, maybe slightly more elaborate than most. I scanned the envelope, the letter, the drawing, my notes on the cipher. I carefully placed the original back in an acid-free folder, labeled it, and put it with the other materials for proper archiving. File it away. Forget it. But I couldn't quite shake the image of that stick figure under the tree, the crosshairs centered on its head. Or the feeling of that specific spot in Golden Gate Park, now marked on my mental map. It felt like a loose thread, snagged on something sharp in the present. Just history, Dave had said. But history has a way of echoing, doesn't it? And sometimes, those echoes sound disturbingly close. The hum of the machine seemed a little louder that night as I finished my shift, the shadows in the corners of the archive basement a little deeper. The rest of that week passed in a haze of forced normalcy. I tried to bury the unease under the weight of routine, focusing on the endless scroll of microfilm, the precise alignment needed for the scanners, the familiar rhythm of the night shift. I told myself Dave was right. It was a historical curiosity, a footnote in a terrifying chapter of the city's past, accidentally unearthed. A crank, a disturbed individual writing rambling letters 60 years ago, nothing more. The chill I felt was just the archive's air conditioning, the lingering echo of a long-dead monster. I focused on the hum of the machines, the soft click of the keyboard, the rustle of old paper. Mundane sounds. Safe sounds. By Friday, I had almost convinced myself. Almost. Then came Monday morning. Routine dictated checking my work email before settling into the night's tasks. Mostly interoffice memos, system update alerts, the usual digital detritus. But one email stood out, sitting incongruously amongst the familiar subjects. It had no subject line. Just blank. The sender address wasn't a name or a recognizable work ID, just a random jumble of numbers and letters, something like 8H3JD9F@protonmail.ch. Proton Mail. Encrypted, anonymous. My stomach tightened. I hesitated, finger hovering over the mouse. Probably sophisticated spam, phishing attempt. But I clicked it open anyway. The body of the email was as stark and empty as the subject line. Just white space, and floating in the center, a single, typed character. That was it. The symbol. The crosshair circle from the letter, from the zodiac. My breath caught in my throat. A cold wave washed over me, prickling my skin. Coincidence? Could it be? Some weird viral marketing, a glitch, targeted spam based on browse history. Had I Googled the zodiac symbol recently? Yes, probably. I forced myself to take a breath. It had to be spam. Weird, unsettling spam, but spam nonetheless. My hand trembled slightly as I clicked delete, then went into my deleted items folder and permanently removed it. I even emptied the trash folder. Gone. Erased. I tried to put it out of my mind, telling myself not to be paranoid, not to connect dots that weren't there. But the image of that symbol, stark and alone in the email, lingered behind my eyes. Tuesday night arrived, heavy and damp with fog outside. I tried to settle in, brew my coffee, line up the next microfilm reel. Checked my email again, almost compulsively. And there it was. Another email. Same sender address, 8H3JD9F@protonmail.ch. Same blank subject line. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I knew what would be inside, but I had to look. I clicked it open. Again. Just the symbol. Cold, precise, menacing in its simplicity. This wasn't spam. This wasn't a coincidence. Twice, from the same anonymous, encrypted source, directly to my work email, days after I found that specific letter. The blood drained from my face. Someone knew. Someone knew I'd found the letter. But how? I hadn't taken it out of the archives. I'd only told Dave, and he dismissed it. Had someone seen me with it? Was there a camera I didn't know about in that section of the archives? Or was it someone at the Chronicle? The thought made me feel sick. The familiar, quiet hum of the archives suddenly felt different, charged with unseen observation. Every shadow seemed deeper, every distant noise a potential footstep. I jumped when the security guard did his rounds later that night, his friendly wave feeling intrusive. I spent the rest of the shift glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The stark image of the Circle Plus burned into my thoughts. I tried tracing the email address online, running searches, but hit dead ends. Proton Mail is designed for anonymity. There was no way to know who sent it or from where. Helplessness tasted bitter, metallic. Wednesday was worse. The dread had followed me home, made sleep patchy and filled with anxious dreams. Returning to the archives felt like walking into a trap. Around midnight, the phone on my desk buzzed, the internal line from the mailroom downstairs. "Sarah? Got a package down here for you, Pete," the mail clerk said, his voice casual. "Small mailer. A package? For me?" My voice sounded thin, reedy. I rarely got personal mail at work, let alone packages. "Yeah," addressed Sarah Chen, SF Chronicle Archives. "No return address though. Wanna come grab it?" "Ah, yeah. Be right down." My hands felt clammy. No return address. Like the emails. Like the original letter, in a way. I walked through the quiet corridors, down the echoing stairwell to the brightly lit mailroom, the knot in my stomach tightening with every step. Pete slid the package across the counter. It was a small, flat, brown cardboard mailer, maybe 6 inches square. Cheap. The address label was typed. My name, the archive's address. And the typing, it looked familiar. Uneven pressure, slightly skewed letters. Chillingly similar to the typing on the Zodiac letter I'd found. My breath hitched. "Looks important," Pete chuckled, oblivious. Or maybe just junk mail. "Yeah. Maybe," I managed, forcing a weak smile. I clutched the mailer, its thin cardboard cool against my sweaty palm, and retreated back to the relative isolation of the archives. I didn't open it immediately. I sat at my desk, staring at it, the hum of the scanner suddenly deafeningly loud. What was inside? Another letter? A threat? I finally took a deep breath and carefully tore open the mailer's flap. Inside, nestled against the cardboard, was a single photograph. An old Polaroid. The colors were slightly faded, muted, with that distinct off-white border. My heart sank as recognition hit me like a physical blow. It was the spot. The exact spot in Golden Gate Park near Stowe Lake, the one indicated by the coordinates in the letter. Noe and 9, the first tree after the stones. The photo showed the small cluster of stones near the path, and behind them, the prominent tree, its branches stark against a gray, overcast sky. It was taken from the perspective of someone standing on the path, looking towards the tree. But it wasn't just a picture of the location. My eyes zeroed in on the trunk of the main tree in the photograph. Carved into the bark, rough but unmistakable, was the symbol, Circle Plus. It wasn't scratched onto the surface of the Polaroid itself. It was in the picture, part of the scene. And the carving looked fresh. The edges were sharp, the color lighter than the surrounding weathered bark. It looked like it had been done very recently. Someone had gone to that specific, obscure spot, the one only revealed in the unpublished letter I had found, and carved the zodiac symbol into the tree. Then they had taken a picture, an old-style Polaroid picture, and mailed it directly to me. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt dizzy, the archive spinning slightly around me. This was confirmation. Absolute, terrifying confirmation. The emails weren't random noise. They were signals. This photo was the message. I know you found the letter. I know you know the location. I've been there. I'm watching you. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. The silence of the archives pressed in, no longer peaceful, but suffocating. I felt utterly exposed, vulnerable. Who was doing this? Why? Was it some elaborate, sick prank by someone who somehow knew about the letter? Or was it something worse? Was the author of that crude letter somehow still active? Or a copycat? The questions hammered at my mind, each possibility more terrifying than the last. I couldn't stay here. Not tonight. I felt like the walls were closing in, the rows of shelved history whispering threats. I called Dave's voicemail, mumbling something about feeling suddenly ill, a migraine coming on. I practically ran out of the building, fumbling with my keys, my coat pulled tight around me. The fog-drenched San Francisco streets felt menacing, every shadow holding a potential watcher, every pair of headlights behind me a possible tail. I drove home in a state of near panic, the Polaroid tucked into my bag like a toxic artifact. I double-locked my apartment door, slid the chain across, drew all the curtains, shutting out the city lights. I sank onto my couch in the darkness, shaking. The image of that freshly carved symbol on the tree burned into my brain. The archive's echoes have followed me home. The history wasn't history anymore. It was here. Now. And it knew my name. Darkness pressed in. Not the comforting, sleep-inducing darkness of my bedroom, but the thick, suffocating darkness of fear. I sat huddled on my threadbare sofa, curtains drawn tight against the San Francisco night, the locks on my apartment door feeling laughably inadequate. Hours must have passed since I'd fled the Chronicle, the Polaroid photo lying face down on the coffee table like a venomous snake I didn't dare touch again, yet couldn't bear to destroy. My small apartment, usually a refuge from the city's noise and the archive's oppressive silence, now felt like a cage. Every creak of the old building's settling timbers was an intruder's footstep. Every distant siren, a warning meant for me. The foghorn's mournful groan from the base sounded like a lament for my sanity. My mind raced, a frantic hamster wheel of terror and disbelief. Who? Who was doing this? How did they know about the letter? The coordinates were only in that letter, the one buried in the unfiled boxes for half a century. Had Dave mentioned it to someone? No, he'd barely given it a second thought. Pete in the mailroom? He just handled the package. Could someone have bugged the archives? Placed a hidden camera aimed at that specific, forgotten corner where I worked? It seemed impossibly elaborate, yet chillingly plausible in the face of the Polaroid's existence. The typed address label, matching the letter's crude style, it felt like a deliberate breadcrumb, linking the past directly to this present torment. Or was it something older? Could someone connected to the original Zodiac, or the author of that specific angry letter still be out there? Still nursing whatever grievance led them to draw that stick figure under the crosshairs? The rational part of my brain screamed no, it was too long ago, decades had passed. People move on, people die. But the terrified part, the part currently making my heart pound against my ribs like a trapped bird, whispered, what if they didn't? What if finding that letter woke something up? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force logic onto the situation. A prank. It had to be a prank. Some cruel, twisted game orchestrated by someone with access and a sick sense of humor. Maybe a colleague I'd inadvertently slighted. Someone who knew I worked the archives, knew about the Zodiac connection to the Chronicle, and somehow found out about the letter discovery. Maybe Dave had casually mentioned the weird Zodiac letter to someone else. But the freshness of the carving in the Polaroid, that implied recent action, specific knowledge, and a willingness to go to that remote spot in the park. And the emails, the untraceable Proton mail address, it felt too calculated, too menacing for a simple office prank. My throat was dry. I needed water, needed to move, to break the paralysis that had gripped me since I'd locked the door. But the thought of crossing the room, even in the darkness, felt dangerous, like exposing myself. The silence was a physical weight. I strained my ears, listening for any sound from the hallway outside my door. Footsteps? Breathing? Nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city sounds filtering through the walls. Eventually, a morbid curiosity, or perhaps just a desperate need to see something solid and real beyond the confines of my own fear, drew me towards the window. My apartment overlooks a moderately busy street, usually lined with parked cars, the occasional late-night walker, and directly across, a glass-panel bus stop shelter. I crept towards the heavy curtains, my hand shaking as I pulled back just a tiny edge, peering through the gap. The fog was thicker now, swirling under the orange glow of the streetlights, making familiar shapes seem ghostly and distorted. The street was mostly empty, slick with dampness. My eyes scanned the parked cars, the doorways across the street, looking for anything out of place, anyone lingering. Then my gaze drifted to the bus stop shelter. Its glass panels were heavily fogged, opaque from the cold, damp air condensing on the surface. And then I saw it. My breath hitched, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. Drawn into the thick layer of condensation on the largest glass panel, the one facing my building directly, was the symbol. Circle Plus. It was huge, easily visible even from my window several stories up. Scrawled with a finger, the lines crude and streaky where the moisture had been wiped away. And it looked wet. Fresh. As if someone had been standing right there, on the sidewalk across the street, just moments before, and had deliberately traced the menacing circle and crosshairs onto the fogged glass. Positioned perfectly for me to see. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror crashed over me. It wasn't just emails anymore. It wasn't just a photo of a remote location. The threat wasn't confined to the archives or the park. It was here. Right outside my home. The Watcher had stepped out of the shadows, out of the past, and was close enough to leave their mark where I couldn't possibly miss it. Close enough to see my window, to know I was inside. I stumbled back from the window, heart hammering so hard I felt dizzy. My legs felt weak, threatening to buckle. I leaned against the wall, gasping for air, the cold plaster a stark contrast to my burning skin. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. I scrambled to check the door locks again, the deadbolt, the chain, knowing they were useless against someone this determined, this invasive. I risked another look, peeking through the barest crack in the curtains. The symbol was still there, stark against the fogged glass, a malevolent eye staring back at me. Was the person who drew it still nearby? Hiding in a darkened doorway? Sitting in one of the parked cars? Or had they simply left their message and vanished back into the fog, confident in the terror they'd inflicted? I scanned the street again, desperately searching the swirling mist and shadows. A figure turned a corner blocks away, just a random pedestrian. A car started up and pulled away from the curb. Coincidence? Or was it them? I was trapped. Utterly, terrifyingly trapped in my own home. Calling the police felt futile. What could I tell them that wouldn't sound like paranoid rambling? Someone found a 60-year-old maybe Zodiac letter in the archives where I work, sent me anonymous emails with the symbol, mailed me a Polaroid of a tree in the park with the symbol carved on it, and now someone drew the symbol in the condensation on the bus stop across the street. They think I was crazy, stressed out, imaginative. They wouldn't see the cold, deliberate chain of events, the escalating intimacy of the threat. The apartment was silent again, but it wasn't empty. Fear was a tangible presence now, breathing cold air onto the back of my neck. I stood frozen in the middle of my living room, listening. Listening for the scrape of a key in the lock that wasn't mine. Listening for a floorboard creaking just outside my door. Listening for the faintest whisper of breath in the hallway. The symbol burned behind my eyes, a promise of horrors yet to come, drawn not just on glass, but on the fragile surface of my reality. The echo from the archive had become a voice, and it was right outside my door. And I had no idea what it would say next.